Jian Wushuang's body was surging with pride, an unprecedented surge. He probably did not even know that it was because of this special quality that he had made so many ancient powerhouses submit to him. Ever since he entered the great Yen domain, he had ended his life in the mortal world. However, after reading the ultimate of all things, who could feel that they could cut off the past? Everything was unknown, and everything was like the first rays of the sun. Xianxia that followed him would sneak a glance at him from time to time, then quickly pretend that nothing had happened and look in other directions. She did not feel tired at all. Di Qing, on the other hand, had been frowning. Finally, he could not help but say, "Wushuang, you were too reckless just now. If it was a trap, I'm afraid we wouldn't even have the chance to escape now. I'm sorry, I was too impulsive just now. I just felt that the voice was too familiar, like an old friend I haven't met yet. That's why I went into danger," Jian Wushuang said apologetically. Di Qing looked at him and said, "Even if it's like this next time, you'd better not take any risks. Every strange heavenly region in the Great Sea region is full of immortal bones. The massacre that Zhen Wuyang caused in the Pioneering War is far beyond your imagination. The current Great Sea region is formed from the heavenly regions of nearly 8 emperors. From what I know, 4 emperors have fallen at his hands. Don't try to go against him. He's very scary." At this moment, Di Qing's eyes became extremely serious. Jian Wushuang nodded. "He has no enmity with me. I will definitely not confront him." Di Qing looked at the void in the distance. "Is that so? The great Yen domain is very complicated. Even if there's no enmity between the two of you, it doesn't mean that you won't rest until one of you is dead." Jian Wushuang smiled and did not say anything else. Xianxia felt that the conversation between them was both simple and complex and difficult to understand. It was like an explanation of some foggy thing, full of uncertainties. But very quickly, she became nervous again because the two of them looked at her again. "Young lady, it's time to point the way. You just need to keep walking forward. I'm familiar with," Xianxia wailed in her heart. She could only continue to lie, and there was no turning back. She believed that as long as she told the truth, Di Qing would probably crush her to death on the spot. Under the guidance of Xianxia, Jian Wushuang flew along with Di Qing. In every breath, they crossed several cold and dead heavenly regions. The journey to the Great Mi Heaven, where Prince Zhou was at, had left the void with only dead silence and desolation. Every heavenly region was like a wasteland, as if no top cultivators had ever set foot in it. However, gradually, the further they advanced, the void that was originally only illuminated by weak and aging stars began to brighten. It was as if the blood-like setting sun was shining on it, and it was dim and hazy. Jian Wushuang did not feel anything strange, but Di Qing's eyes showed doubt and caution. He smelled something familiar. Soon after, when the first ray of dim light entered his eyes, he finally knew where that sense of familiarity came from. It was the fusang tree, an endless number of fusang trees. Each leaf seemed to be made of bronze, and they bloomed in the void. The dim light that illuminated the void was coming from the leaves. The void in front of them had become ethereal, replaced by an unimaginably vast sea. The endless fusang trees grew in the sea area. They were arranged in 2 rows and extended into the endless distance along the sea area. This scene shocked Jian Wushuang. It was like an immortal's miracle. It was beyond his imagination. None of them would have thought that the path in the void would be replaced by a sea with unknown latitude. After a moment's hesitation, Jian Wushuang and Di Qing looked at each other and then leaped forward, flying over the sea. The fusang trees on both sides of the road were tall and straight, like the ruins of an immortal. The halo emitted from the magnificent branches and leaves shone on the body, giving off an indescribable warmth. Each of the fusang trees growing in this region was several times larger than the only fusang tree in the northern heaven celestial prefecture. The golden crow Di Qing, who had the blood of his ancestors flowing in his body, was proud. He would only reveal his true appearance on the fusang tree and then rest. At this moment he was already extremely relaxed. Golden patterns were flowing on his skin that was exposed outside of his luxurious clothes. However, Jian Wushuang did not let his guard down. The more unusual a place was, the more unexpected things would happen. For example, when he first entered the Great Yen domain during his great voyage, no one would have thought that there would be a terrifying giant sea-sky octopus under the sea. Therefore, he was always on guard. As for Xianxia that was holding the little beast, her eyes were already moving as she exclaimed in surprise. This was an extremely fantastical place that was like a celestial realm, and she could not help but lose herself in it. Jian Wushuang used yen power to knock her down at the right time so that she would not lose her way. The three figures shuttled through the Fusang waterway and moved forward. "Do you think the end of this waterway is connected to the Great Mi Heaven?" Di Qing asked. "We've been traveling for a while now. Logically, we should be arriving soon." Jian Wushuang did not speak but looked at Xianxia beside him. The corners of her mouth turned up stiffly. Don't worry. We'll be there soon. I have a feeling." "I hope so." Di Qing's voice was deep and cold. He did not even look at her and continued to fly forward at a constant speed. After an unknown period of time, a white boat suddenly appeared on the vast sea in front of them, floating leisurely. Jian Wushuang immediately became alert. At the same time, he secretly used yen power to deal with the possible situation that might arise. The lone white boat was at ease. No matter how Jian Wushuang and the other two ascended, it would always hang in front of them, neither far nor close. "Fellow travelers, the journey has been long. Why don't you come to the boat and chat for a while to relieve your fatigue?" A deep and aged voice came from the boat and entered Jian Wushuang's ears. Di Qing looked at him and shook his head, indicating him not to go. However, in the next moment, something strange happened. Seeing that they did not go over, the white boat actually sailed back. In the blink of an eye, it stopped in front of Jian Wushuang and the others. This speed had shocked them all, and they were all prepared to fight. "Travelers, there's no need to worry. Board the ship. I'll give you a ride." On the boat, an old man in a green Taoist robe turned to look at them with a smile. He held a chess piece between his index and middle fingers, but he had yet to put it down. Looking into the boat, there was only a chessboard and the two figures in red and blue Taoist robes. However, Jian Wushuang did not move. Instead, he cupped his hands and said, "Old sir, thank you for your kindness. However, we are on a different path, so we will not bother you. It doesn't matter. Although the destination is different, we can travel together for the time being. It's been a long time since the two of us have chatted with outsiders." The old man in the green Taoist robe laughed and placed the chess piece between his fingers on the chessboard. Jian Wushuang was a little wary of the repeated invitations. "With a boat, it'll save some energy to deal with the possible situation that might happen next, right?" After saying this, the old Taoist stopped talking and focused on playing chess with another old Taoist. Jian Wushuang, who was originally vigilant, was relieved. Then he landed on the boat. The kind old Taoist was so focused on fighting with the other serious old Taoist that he did not have time to chat with Jian Wushuang and the others. "My lord, this place is so beautiful." Xianxia behind him could not help but exclaim softly. However, Jian Wushuang did not talk to her. After he came to the boat, his eyes were all on the chessboard. This was a strange game of chess. There wasn't a single black piece on the entire board, and the two old Taoist priests only held white pieces. Half of the game had already passed. He was puzzled. They were all white pieces, so how did the two old Taoists recognize who was the enemy? Could they be like the Fengtian Patriarch from the Divine Power universe? Were they just terrible at chess? Even though Jian Wushuang's chess skill was worse than that of Fengtian Patriarch, he was still unaware of it. Instead, he was carefully observing the chess game. Very quickly, he was shocked, because he could not understand anything. The white pieces on both sides stopped, and he could not even tell friend from foe. However, Jian Wushuang knew very well that the two old Taoist chess skills were definitely not as wild as his. They were also not like Fengtian Patriarch, who only knew how to block holes after several chaos cycles. They were not mediocre players, but true experts. Even though Jian Wushuang could not distinguish between friend and foe, he could clearly see the attacks of the two old Taoists. The seemingly kind-looking old Taoist chess moves were as fierce as a tiger, and he liked to besiege and conquer pieces. On the other hand, the old Taoist who had not spoken or smiled from the beginning to the end had a gentle chess move. He was neither anxious nor impatient as he slowly planned. Moreover, the game was only halfway through. When the stern old Taoist stopped with a piece, the kind old Taoist suddenly became extremely vexed. How could it be? How could he lose like this? At this time, she looked at Xianxia and could not help but say, "It's strange. The chess pieces should be black and white. How can you tell when you use the same color chess piece?" When the amiable old Taoist heard this, his originally vexed expression also eased. He turned to look at Xianxia. "You're an interesting girl. Your heart is true and sincere. You're a good seedling for cultivation. My pieces don't distinguish between black and white. There's only one color. That's because I'm waiting for a fated person to come and try with a black piece." Xianxia pursed her lips and laughed. "Don't tell me I have to prepare my own chess pieces when I play chess with you." The kind old Taoist shook his head with a smile and stopped talking. Instead, he turned around and messed up the chess pieces on the board. "Quick! Let's play another game." Another game. The other old Taoist, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. "Again? You don't have anything else to bet on me, you know? Stop it. We don't know who will win this round. Let's hurry up." The kind old Taoist took a stance and started a new round of fighting. Jian Wushuang did not say anything and just stared at the new round of chess. But soon, a similar scene played out again. The friendly old man was defeated again. That shouldn't be the case. Why am I the one who lost again? He scratched his head, his expression anxious. A smug look appeared on the cold-faced old Taoist's face. "You lost again, old man. Tell me, what are you going to give to me?" The kind old Taoist looked dejected. He reached out and touched his body. Soon, he looked at Jian Wushuang for help. "My young friend, can you lend me something to pawn to that old thing? I will get him to compensate double when I beat him." Jian Wushuang opened his mouth and finally said, "What kind ofo item? Anything is fine. It's just to form a good relationship." The kind old Taoist looked at him and said, "Since any item would do." Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and took out a pill with a strong aura from the interspatial ring. "I'll have to trouble little friend to stretch out your hand and rub the pill," the kind old Taoist said with a smile. Although it was a little strange, Jian Wushuang still did as he was told and handed him the pill that he had rubbed. The kind old Taoist bowed and threw the pill to the cold-faced old Taoist. "Get lost." The cold-faced old Taoist caught the pill and stuffed it into his arms, then stood up and gave up his seat. "Little friend, while there's still some time, why don't we have a round?" The kind old Taoist also got up and made an inviting gesture. Jian Wushuang, who was standing at the side with his arms crossed, was a little stunned. This kind of invitation was like a public punishment for a lousy chess player like him, whom even the Fengtian patriarch could easily defeat. I'm not good at playing chess. It's better if I don't come forward and embarrass myself." Jian Wushuang smiled embarrassedly and waved his hands. The amiable old Taoist smiled and said, "It's all right. The worst-case scenario is just getting stuck. I'll help you with some moves when you're stuck." Under such an invitation, Jian Wushuang could not refuse and could only brace himself to take a seat. "Little friend, although this chess piece only has one color, it has its own changes. Only the player can see it." He smiled and pointed at the chess pieces in the chessboard. Slowly exhaling, Jian Wushuang put his finger into the chessboard and took out a white chess piece. He then placed it on the star position. The white piece did not change, it was as white as jade. The kind old Taoist's gaze was fixed on the chess piece that had been placed. When he saw that there was no change, a touch of desolation and disappointment flashed in the depths of his eyes. However, he returned to normal very quickly, and Jian Wushuang started fighting. The outcome of the chess game that could be predicted before it even started naturally ended with Jian Wushuang's defeat after a while. "I've lost." Jian Wushuang smiled helplessly. "It's fine, little friend. If you work hard in the future, you'll definitely be able to compete with us." The kind old Taoist stroked his beard and smiled. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and did not say anything. They had met by chance and traveled together. It was unlikely that they would see each other again after they left. The kind old Taoist continued, I owe you something. If we meet again in the future, I will return it to you in double. Although the pill was a supreme treasure, it was no different from an ordinary item to Jian Wushuang. It was really nothing, so he did not intend to take it back one day. After sharing his thoughts with the kind old Taoist, he stroked his beard and smiled. My young friend, don't joke around. Once you lend, you must return. It's unfair if I don't return it to you. Jian Wushuang knew that there was no point in arguing, so he just laughed it off. This sea area was originally vast and unfathomable, but after playing a few games of chess on the boat, there were signs of reaching the end. They watched as the border of the heavenly domains start to appear on the horizon of this sea area. Jian Wushuang looked at the kind old Taoist and asked, Sir, if I may ask, do you know where the upper desolate heavenly region is? Xianxia's expression immediately tightened, and her slender palms smothered the little beast in her arms to death. It's over, it's over. I've been completely exposed. Please don't kill me. She was crying in her heart. The upper desolate is not far from here, the old Taoist said. You just need to cross over 10 heavenly regions and you'll be able to reach the upper desolate. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and said, Thank you for your guidance. Xianxia was stunned. She could not believe it, but then she let out long breath and said proudly, How is it? I told you we were almost there, but you didn't believe me. Before she could finish, Di Qing glared at her. After the chess game, the trip to the sea area also came to an end. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and said goodbye. Then, he continued to move forward with Di Qing and Xianxia. At the end of the ocean, under a huge fusang tree, the kind old Taoist stood on the bow of the ship, looking at the place where he had disappeared. The cold-faced old Taoist also walked out and stood beside him. The item you asked him for has a lot of fate energy attached to it. I know. It's because I used a small trick to borrow 200 years of fate energy from that young friend. You have to think clearly. When the time comes, you have to pay him back double. Shut up, you old fogey. I don't need you to teach me. After leaving the Fusang waterway, Jian Wushuang followed the old man's words and passed through more than 10 dead silent heavenly regions. He finally saw a dark red heavenly region. This used to be the main battlefield between imperial emperors. The unimaginable power of the emperors burned countless heavenly regions and void, killing countless living beings. After Emperor Zhenwuyang successfully annexed this place, he created a heavenly region that was like a purgatory to commemorate the Great War. The heavenly region was also known as the Upper Desolate. It was impossible to fake or cover up such an iconic heavenly region. This also meant that they would reach the Great Mi Heaven where Prince Zhou was located after advancing 100 heavenly regions. The confrontation this time was probably even fiercer than the previous one in the Northern Heaven Celestial Prefecture. It was still a question mark for Jian Wushuang whether Yin Ling, who was wearing the heaven-patterned bone armor, had escaped to the Great Mi Heaven in the end. He had to take such a risk just because of a sentence from that heroic-looking woman. It was truly a little crazy. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang looked at Xianxia beside him and said softly, We will reach the Great Mi Heaven in 100 heavenly region. Your task has been completed. Xianxia swallowed. No, don't tell me you're going to leave me here. I won't leave you here. I'll send you to a more prosperous heavenly region later. After we're done, I'll go pick you up. When she heard this, she shook her head like a rattledrum. Then, she pursed her lips and said, No, no, I want to follow you all the time, even if I die. Otherwise, if you leave me in a heavenly region and don't care about me anymore, I won't be able to go back. The place we're going to is very dangerous. We don't have time to take care of you. Jian Wushuang frowned. Xianxia hurriedly shook her head. You don't have to worry about me. Just take me with you. My San Qing will protect me. Jian Wushuang wanted to say something, but Di Qing said, Take her with you. We don't need to be responsible for her life or death. You've thought it through? Jian Wushuang looked at her and said. Xianxia nodded. Don't worry. I won't cause you any trouble. As they advanced, many heavenly regions appeared in the cold and dead void. However, these heavenly regions were like the young emperor's six heavens realm. They were all on high alert. The death of a prince was a huge matter for the entire Great Sea region. Hence, Emperor Zhenwuyang naturally took care of the other six princes. It was already very difficult to see Yen immortals in the void, so they had to be more cautious and not be discovered when they entered Great Mi Heaven. Nearly 100 vast heavenly region were left behind by Jian Wushuang. In front of him, the Great Mi Heaven slowly appeared. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to figure out how to enter the Great Mi Heaven, dozens of murderous intents suddenly burst out from the dark void in front of him. He immediately became alert and wanted to escape with Di Qing and Shi Qingqi. But the killing intent came so fast that he ran into it in just a few breaths. However, Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed. In front of the dozens of figures that pierced the void and carried heavy killing intent was a woman who was on the verge of death. Moreover, he was very familiar with that woman. She was one of the 7 swordsmen who had tried to assassinate Prince Mo. She was the heroic-looking woman who had informed him that she had come to Great Mi Heaven. The battle in the void was coming to an end. How could she escape from the battle of more than 10 Yen immortals and more than 20 ancestor realm cultivators? The prince has ordered that to kill everyone. Attack! The leading Yen immortal shouted in anger. At the same time, he shook his arms and released thousands of rays of Yen power, trying to kill him on the spot. The void was illuminated by Yen power, and all kinds of Yen power were like an irresistible cage, pressing down on her. The heroic-looking woman's mouth was dripping with blood. At the last moment, she stopped her escape and stood still, coldly looking at the Yen immortals. In the next moment, the situation changed drastically. A figure broke through the air and faced the countless terrifying Yen power. His expression was calm as he raised his hand. Suddenly, the void shattered, and countless black flood water gushed out from the void, devouring the interweaving and falling Yen power. There were 7 tiny stars surging between his brows, exuding an intimidating aura. As soon as the stars appeared, it was the immortal style. Only by mastering an immortal style could one directly crush a Yen immortal of the same level. Jian Wushuang's immortal style was called a little mountain river. In the mountains and rivers, everything was under his control, and he could destroy all enemies. Facing so many Yen immortals and top cultivators, he was not afraid at all and easily devoured their Yen power moves. Then, he looked at the heroic-looking woman who was covered in wounds and frowned. Their eyes met, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. She had not expected him to come so quickly and so swiftly. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang raised his palm and countless rays of terrifying Yen power light shot out. They formed a huge net and blocked her head. The astral winds raged, and several Yen immortals did not have time to dodge. They were turned into sieves and their immortal sources were completely destroyed. In just a single exchange, the pursuing team had lost 4 Yen immortals and over 10 ancestor-level cultivators. The remaining Yen immortals were all shocked by the sharp technique. Their eyes were filled with panic and they had the intention to retreat. However, they did not retreat. Instead, they stood still and were in a stalemate with Jian Wushuang. Because behind them was the Great Mi heavenly region, they could advance or retreat. Moreover, they had not completed their master's death order, so they could not go back. With this in mind, the leader, a middle-aged Yen immortal, gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "Guests at the front, this is the Great Mi Heaven, a heavenly region under the second emperor. We are following the emperor's orders to hunt down the remaining evildoers. I hope you don't stop us." Jian Wushuang shifted his gaze from her to the top Yen immortal cultivators. It was the best plan not to get into a conflict with the entire Great Mi Heaven and Prince Zhou. However, the sudden turn of events had made the matter more difficult to handle. He had already killed several Yen immortals, which meant that it was impossible for him to have a good ending. Jian Wushuang didn't speak, but looked at Di Qing and nodded slightly. Di Qing also nodded and slowly took a step forward. Yen power swept forward like the night sky. He just slowly raised a palm and clenched it in the air. The void was instantly shattered. A huge palm covered in pitch-black scales and clear veins came pressing down. All the Yen immortals and top cultivators were so angry that their eyes were about to pop out. They did not even have the time to channel their yen power before they were all killed by that palm. Di Qing, who had once fought against 2 grand yen immortals at the same level, had reached the peak of his control over yen power. His attack was like a dark cloud covering the sky, but it did not stir up any violent yen power. Instead, it directly crushed the immortal sources of those yen immortals. Then, Di Qing withdrew his palm and retreated behind Jian Wushuang. In the hazy void, only the raging squall was left. It was as if nothing had happened. The heroic-looking woman subconsciously took a few steps back and looked at Jian Wushuang and the others in horror. Dispersing yen power, Jian Wushuang walked quickly to her and said, "Long time no see." After calming down slightly, she said, "You, how did you get here so quickly?" "Because I believe that you didn't lie to me, so I came," he said. "Now it seems that I came at the right time." Wiping away the blood at the corner of her mouth, the heroic-looking woman looked at him and said, "Thank you for saving my life. I will definitely repay you in the future." "No need. It's not good for me if you die in front of me. I have my reasons for saving you," Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice. "Now we are going to enter the Great Me Heaven." There was a hint of astonishment in her eyes. Then, she gritted her teeth and said, "You're going in to assassinate Prince Jiao?" Jian Wushuang shook his head. "He has no enmity with me. Why would I kill him? I've entered the Great Me Heaven to find that Ling and take back something." The heroic-looking woman exhaled slowly and said, "I'm afraid that it won't be easy for you to get close to the current Ling. She's already under Prince Jiao's command. It seems that she really escaped and got into this Great Me Heaven." He furrowed his brows. She continued, "She and Prince Jiao are now inseparable. If you want to get close to her, you can only get close to Prince Jiao." Jian Wushuang nodded and was already thinking of a solution. "Is there the most secure way to enter the Great Me Heaven? The Northern Heaven Celestial Prefecture has been destroyed, and Prince Mo has been killed. I think the other 6 princes will be grounded to varying degrees. I'm afraid it won't be easy to enter the Great Me Heaven at this time," the heroic-looking woman said. "The dozens of heavenly regions in the entire Great Me Heaven have been cordoned off." Jian Wushuang frowned. "Is there no safe route?" After a moment of silence, she said, "Of course there is, but I'm afraid you won't get involved easily." "Where?" "North Sky Heavenly Region. Desolate Ancient Spirit Altar." Among the 7 princes under Zhen Wuyang, the heavenly regions controlled by the second prince, Prince Jiao, was the most vast. The entire Great Me Heaven included a total of 23 super heavenly regions. It was so vast that even the 6th heavens realm of the young emperor, Prince Yen, could not compare to it. The entire Great Me Heaven had 4 heaven gates in the east, west, south, and north. One could enter from the heaven gates and meet Prince Jiao. Although there were 4 heaven gates, there were actually only 3. The other north heaven gate, which was the North Sky Heavenly Region, was a completely silent grave. The entire North Sky Heavenly Region was completely made up of tombs, and those tombs that had been silent for countless years were left behind from the era of Zhen Wuyang. They were all experts who had died in battle. Although their immortal source was scattered, their immortal bones still contained terrifying energy, and ordinary yen immortals could not even step into it. Naturally, there was no yen immortal guarding the North Sky Heavenly Region. He had learned all of this from the heroic-looking woman. After hearing the news, Jian Wushuang did not hesitate at all. He took Di Qing and Shi Qingqi and went straight to the North Sky Heavenly Region. The North Sky Heavenly Region of Great Me Heaven was located in the extreme north, and the deathly aura was enough to permeate half of the void. No yen immortal or top cultivator would come to this place. "We're here. The North Sky Heavenly Region is up ahead." In the boundless void, the heroic-looking woman stood still and looked into the distance. It was a dark Hiveli region that could not be seen easily. Who knew how many years had passed? The yen power that used to be owned by the mighty powers had become ownerless, wreaking havoc in the void. Only by entering the Great Me Heaven from here will we not be discovered by Prince Jiao and the guards. However, don't think that this is the safest place. From a certain perspective, this place could possibly be the most dangerous place. For example, What do you mean, for example? My identity is not high enough. I know nothing about the North Sky heavenly region. I only know that it is dangerous and I can't step into it easily. Jian Wushuang held his chin and said while thinking, that can't be. I think your status should be quite high in the Great Me Heaven. Otherwise, Prince Zhou wouldn't have asked you to carry out that assassination mission. Right? The heroic-looking woman glared at him angrily. Don't bring up the past. If you continue to talk about it, aren't you afraid that I'll be angry and inform Prince Zhou? Jian Wushuang smiled and said calmly, if he really wanted you to live, the previous scene would not have happened. You should know who wants you dead the most. The heroic-looking woman fell silent. She then raised her head and said, let's go. As long as I don't die, I'll bring you all into the Great Me Heaven. All right, thank you. Jian Wushuang lowered his eyes and nodded. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, by the way, I'm a little curious. What did Ling take from you? Prince Zhou gave me the golden seal. After she took it, she used it to open the way to the Great Me Heaven. Jian Wushuang nodded. If what she said was true, then it was very likely that Ling had not left them after the destruction of the Northern Heaven Celestial Prefecture. Instead, she had been following them and hiding in the dark, waiting for a certain opportunity. However, what Jian Wushuang couldn't figure out was how Ling could guess that the heroic woman was sent by the Great Me Heaven and then take the golden seal to the Great Me Heaven. By the way, do you have any connection with the group of Immortal who were selling Black Mountain crystals in the Northern Heaven Celestial Prefecture? The heroic-looking woman said coldly. I can't tell you anything about what happened before. Jian Wushuang continued. Also, how should I address you? Zhao Ting. As soon as he stepped into the North Sky heavenly region, an ancient and desolate aura greeted him. At the same time, there was an invisible force pulling and devouring the yen power around him. The tombs were as quiet as mountains, stretching into the distance that could not be seen. Rather than saying that these immortal tombs were built in the North Sky heavenly region, it would be better to say that the North Sky heavenly region was completely made up of immortal tombs. As the tombs that had existed since ancient times were extremely dense, there was almost no space for them to land on. Hence, Jian Wushuang and the others flew at a low altitude above the North Sky heavenly region and advanced slowly. Although the masters within each immortal tomb had died, the former yen power still existed. Although they were dying in an irreversible way, they were still strong today. Moreover, the almighties in these immortal tombs were at least yen immortal, and there were many existences at the level of Grand Yen Immortal. No one spoke. Everyone raised their yen power to the peak, already prepared for all the possible situations that might occur. Xianxia followed Jian Wushuang closely. Whether it was intentional or not, it forced the heroic-looking woman, Zhao Ting, to make way for her. The little beast in her arms seemed extremely excited, as if it was very interested in the dense aura in the immortal graveyard, and kept sniffing. San Qing, you better behave yourself. If you continue, I'll throw you down. Xianxia threatened in a low voice. Little beast restrained itself a little when it heard her words, but it was still restless in her arms. Jian Wushuang looked at the small beast in her arms and asked, what's the use of this small beast? Xianxia nodded. I picked up San Qing in the deep mountains when I was young. It's a dream-eating tapir that can swallow bad nightmares and dispel bad luck. Therefore, I have always carried it with me. It will bring me good luck. Jian Wushuang nodded and continued to fly forward. The entire North Sky heavenly region could be considered as one of the larger heavenly regions in the Great Me Heaven, and it would take a long time to cross it. And the danger that Zhao Ting mentioned should be the chaotic yen force that was surging in the immortal graveyard. As they continued to move forward, the nightmare tapir in his arms became even more restless. There was only excitement in its clear eyes. At the next moment, the little beast suddenly jumped out of the body of Xianxia. Like a fish, it plunged into the group of immortal tombs below with great speed and ferocity. San Qing! Xianxia was shocked. Jian Wushuang also saw this unusual scene. He waved his arm and the yen power radiance shot out. Thousands of rays of the yen power fell like a knot. The tapir turned its head around, opened its mouth, and swallowed all the yen power's brilliance into its stomach. Then, it plunged into the group of immortal tombs without stopping. Jian Wushuang frowned and had a bad feeling. The dream-eating tapir that landed in the group of immortal tombs screeched at the sky and raised its 4 claws before it started to fly. The surrounding yen power, which was already in an extremely chaotic state, went berserk and instantly triggered the entire North Sky heavenly region. Damn thing! I'm going to skin it alive! Di Qing was furious, and he raised his palm to release yen power. No, you can't! Jian Wushuang lowered his voice and stopped him from using yen power, which was about to leave his hand. You can't do anything. The aura here is not right. As if to confirm his words, the entire North Sky heavenly region's ownerless yen power was completely chaotic and violent. As the initiator, the dream-eating tapir was devouring some unknown aura while it was running. Pitch-black patterns began to appear on its snow-white body, and its body, which was originally as long as an arm, grew to more than 100 feet in size. It was devouring spirit. Although those ancient mighty figures were in a deep sleep and the immortal source was broken, their Tao and aura would not dissipate so easily. They would only dissipate in the long years and eventually return to the heaven domain. The dream-eating tapir was devouring the ownerless Tao to strengthen itself. Zhao Ting was equally shocked. With such a disturbance happening in the originally silent North Sky heavenly region, Prince Zhou would definitely notice it. Once they were discovered, it would be difficult for them to escape. Let's go quickly. I'm afraid that Prince Zhou will soon find out about the turmoil here, Zhao Ting urged. I'll go and capture San Qing. Shi Qingqi was already shocked out of her wits. Jian Wushuang frowned and looked at the dream-eating tapir that was still devouring spirits. Almost at the same time, in the middle state of Great Mi Heaven, on the celestial platform that was situated above the clouds, a lazy figure dressed in a white robe quietly opened his eyes and looked toward the north. He was the second prince of Zhenwuyang, Prince Zhou. Very quickly, several figures with powerful auras ascended the celestial platform. Your Highness, there's a commotion coming from the North Sky heavenly region. I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Can the dead come back to life? Prince Zhou did not even lift his eyelids. You don't have to report the North Sky heavenly region's matter. You may leave. Yes. The shadows replied and then retreated. By the way, send Yinling over. I want to see her. The palm came down, and the unparalleled yen power almost bound the dream-eating tapir, but it still managed to escape. Jian Wushuang had obviously lost his patience and started to prepare to kill it. The dream-eating tapir was greedy. The stomach was like a bottomless pit. It was devouring the spirits even when it was running for its life. As it devoured, its body underwent a huge change, especially its eyes. Below its original eyes, there were 2 cracks, and a pair of eyes had grown out. It looked extremely strange. Jian Wushuang and Di Qing joined forces to kill it. The overwhelming attacks gradually forced it into a dead end. However, at this moment something happened. The dream-eating tapir that was running away seemed to have hit a transparent barrier. It stopped for a moment before it fell to the ground and wailed. At the same time, the ground started to collapse and crack. Jian Wushuang and the others, who were in pursuit, also stopped and looked forward. Among the countless immortal tombs, the one in the center was several times larger than the ordinary immortal tombs. It was like several divine peaks stacked together, revealing an unpredictable pressure. The dream-eating tapir fell in front of this immortal graveyard. At this moment, with the collapse of the ground, cracks began to appear on the immortal graveyard. It was obvious that it was about to collapse. Let's go! Zhao Ting was extremely nervous. Looking at the unpredictable scene, Jian Wushuang did not want to be involved and wanted to escape immediately. I'm afraid we won't be able to leave, Di Qing said in a deep voice and looked behind him. The originally silent immortal graveyard began to crack open as one after another. Unconscious immortal bones walked out of the graveyard and flew shakily up into the void, sealing off their path of escape. How is that possible? Jian Wushuang was in disbelief. The owners of these immortal bones had died countless years ago. Whether it was from the immortal source or the immortal body, they had all dissipated and did not meet the conditions for resurrection. Even those who guarded Emperor Lu Ya's heavenly court, the 3 immortal bones of Grand Yen Immortals, were only able to continue guarding them because of a certain obsession. But now, these immortal bones that had been dormant in the immortal graveyard had all awakened and gathered together. There were no less than thousands of them. "We can only kill our way out," Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice as an invisible sword formed in his hand. Di Qing was also ready to deal with it, and his golden eyes began to surge with power. Zhao Ting sighed and took out a long and thin blade from her waist, preparing to deal with it. More and more immortal bones crawled out of the immortal graveyard. They were unconscious, but all of them gathered together. Jian Wushuang no longer hesitated. He swung his sword, and an unparalleled sword intent burst forth, directly sweeping into the immortal bone. The sword intent swept out and instantly cleared a large area. The immortal bones, which had no immortal source and no consciousness, could be easily damaged. Pathetic! Di Qing also gave a deep shout, and a black image emerged from his back, crashing into the mountain-like immortal bones. The North Sky heavenly region was shaking, and countless immortal tombs were destroyed. Immortal bones fell to the ground like rain. However, this was only the beginning. The largest immortal tomb in the center finally shattered. At the same time, thousands of treasure lights burst out from the tomb, causing the sky to change. A figure that was dozens of feet tall and wearing a tattered Taoist robe walked out of the immortal graveyard. He had a horsetail whisk stuck on his back, and in his skinny and black hand, he held a real sword that was emitting a precious light. His cheeks were rotten, and his bones could be seen from his broken gray skin. His eyes were shriveled and also grayish-white, without the slightest sign of life. All the signs indicated that this old Taoist who carried a horsetail whisk and held a precious light true sword had long since perished. After clearing hundreds of immortal bones in front of him with the ancestral skill, the Transcendence Heavenly Gate, Jian Wushuang looked at the figure walking out of the immortal graveyard with a serious expression. The old Taoist figure gave him an extremely dangerous aura. He could naturally sense the surging aura of death around the old Taoist, but the more it was so, the more vigilant he had to be. Once there was an obsession, even if one's body turned into white bones, it would still be quite terrifying. This old Taoist who had died many years ago was definitely several times stronger than the white bones that guarded the heavenly court of Emperor Lu Ya. Di Qing's eyes were also solemn, because he had also sensed the dangerous aura. The North Sky heavenly region, which was originally as chaotic as a battlefield, suddenly became deathly silent. Everyone looked forward. The old Taoist with the horsetail whisk on his back and the glowing true sword in his hand stepped forward and then reached out to remove the horsetail whisk on his back. The ancient voice resounded. "I have walked out of the netherworld. I raise my flag and summon my old troops to destroy all enemies in front of me." As he spoke, he waved the horsetail whisk in his hand, and the entire North Sky heavenly region became restless and chaotic again. The horsetail whisk seemed to carry a demonic sound as it scattered toward every immortal tomb. At this moment, the immortal bones that were originally crushed and shattered slowly squirmed and gathered together again. At the same time, thousands of immortal tomb armor cracked open and immortal bones walked out. There were a total of 5,000 immortal bones, ones that belonged to Yen Immortals when they were alive. Even though they were dead, they still carried an unparalleled momentum. The old Taoist held the horsetail whisk and the treasure light true sword in his hand. His shriveled and grayish-white eyes gradually filled up with a ferocious scarlet color. "Wherever the sword points, my old subordinates will be suppressed." He pointed his sword forward, and the sharp edge of the sword was pointed at Jian Wushuang and the others. In an instant, the unconscious immortal bones seemed to have received some kind of response. They flooded in from all directions. Jian Wushuang drew his sword and used the first move of the Star River Lake Sea Sword Intent, Star. The sword intent slashed forward with an unparalleled force that tore the immortal bone apart. At the same time, the sword will's pillar of light exploded completely, clearing an area in an instant. Di Qing was not weak either. With the strength of a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, he could easily crush the immortal bones. His strength had reached its peak. With the two of them working together, none of the immortal bones could move forward, let alone get close. When the old Taoist saw this scene from afar, his scarlet eyes flickered and he waved his horsetail whisk again. With a wave of the horsetail whisk, the countless shattered immortal bones began to reform. They mixed together and gradually formed an immortal bone formation that stretched for thousands of miles. The mighty magic formation had already taken shape and wrapped Jian Wushuang and the others in it. Countless ownerless forces, wild and chaotic, rose up from the immortal bone array like giant white bone palms, pulling at them. Jian Wushuang felt a sense of danger. Without thinking, he slashed at the magic formation below him. However, the sword intent that had always been successful was like a clay ox entering the sea. It was silent and ineffective. The more immortal bones it devoured, the stronger the immortal bone array became. At the same time, the old Taoist holding the horsetail whisk and the true sword appeared in front of the formation. Then he raised the true sword in his hand, which was surrounded by yen power, and suddenly stabbed it into the formation. This sword strike went straight for Di Qing. His golden eyes turned serious as he moved to block. Swish! With a deep sound like a great bell, Di Qing took a step back. At the same time, Jian Wushuang took action. He retaliated by slashing forward with the invisible true sword in his palm to resolve the terrible sword strike. The two swords clashed and the sword intent that Di Qing had neutralized was then eliminated by Jian Wushuang. The immortal bone array fell silent. Di Qing's right palm trembled slightly as he retreated, and his right palm was covered in divine blood. The might of the old Taoist's sword strike had actually injured him. One must know that Di Qing was already a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, ranked at the peak. Even great Yen Immortals of the same realm could hardly injure him. However, the old Taoist who claimed to have walked out of the netherworld had injured him with just a casual sword strike. Di Qing was not the only one. After Jian Wushuang destroyed the sword strike, the undisguisable sword intent also made his qi and blood boil. This casual strike had injured them to varying degrees. Netherworld old Taoist did not stop at all. He stabbed forward with his treasured true sword again. Chengqi! Di Qing chanted the incantation in a deep voice, and a huge beam of light that could not be covered surged from his back. A pure white crow appeared, and its eyes, which were as holy as a snow lotus, had a divine charm. Then it crashed into the netherworld old Taoist. As if sensing the threat, he took a step back and swung the horsetail whisk in his left hand forward. In an instant, hundreds of millions of white threads of the horsetail whisk danced like long snakes and came down on the white crow. The two collided, and before the celestial form of the white crow could even release its power, it was already entangled by the countless white threads of the horsetail whisk. Jian Wushuang frowned and immediately looked at Zhao Ting and Shi Qingqi, who were both pale. When we fight later, I'll use all my strength to tear a hole in the magic formation. Then you can go as far away as you can. Zhao Ting looked at him and opened her mouth, but she did not say anything. Shi Qingqi's eyes were slightly red as it said, "My lord, I'm sorry. It's my fault. Good luck?" Jian Wushuang took one last look at her and walked forward with the invisible sword in his hand. Di Qing's expression was solemn as he said in a deep voice, "Although this old Taoist has already died, the energy contained in his body is extremely abundant. I'm afraid his immortal source has not been consumed." Jian Wushuang looked forward with a serious expression. If his judgment was correct, old Taoist Huang Quan was likely to be a peak 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, the same realm as Di Qing. Moreover, old Taoist Huang Quan was not fighting alone. More and more immortal bones were tearing apart the immortal graveyard and walking out of it, waiting for his orders. The first battle after entering the Great Mi Heaven would probably be quite tricky. After Di Qing's attack was offset by the white silk of the horsetail whisk, netherworld old Taoist stopped fighting. Instead, he retreated quickly and waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. The horsetail whisk seemed to have some kind of bewitching demonic sound, and the immortal bones once again flew over from all directions. "Don't let these things get close to me. I'll go and take that old Taoist's head." Di Qing looked at Jian Wushuang and said. Jian Wushuang nodded and his palm released unparalleled yen power. Each wisp was enough to break a set of immortal bones. Di Qing did not stay any longer. A pair of wings with golden patterns on them suddenly appeared on his back, and he flew up into the void. Facing the netherworld old Taoist, he did not release his celestial form, but flapped his wings. In an instant, the endless yen power burst forth like the mountains and seas. Hundreds of millions of golden feathers, carrying an unimaginable aura, fell down like a divine punishment from the heavens. Every golden feather was destructive, and the dead air in the sky was devoured. They also burned large, shocking holes, and everything was illuminated. This was Di Qing's full-strength move, a move without any reservation. Boom! Netherworld old Taoist looked up at the destructive golden feathers and waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. The white threads of the horsetail whisk instantly extended for thousands of miles, turning into a barrier to protect himself. At this moment, the earth was torn apart. Countless immortal bones were burned by the golden feathers, and even the earth was burning. No matter how strong the boundary of the horsetail whisk that the netherworld old Taoist had set up with one hand was, it was still unable to resist the golden feathers that carried the power of mountains and seas. When the boundary of the horsetail whisk was torn open, the golden feathers that filled the sky were like locusts, bombarding the netherworld old Taoist. The indescribable explosion with him as the center directly tore the north sky heavenly region from the middle, and the plane was about to be torn apart. No one below the Yen immortal realm could withstand the energy that was being released. Jian Wushuang extended his hand to protect Shi Qingqi and Zhao Ting behind him. Then, he prepared to break the formation below him without stopping. In the next moment, an old voice that was like a large bell rang out. Freeze! Jian Wushuang, who was holding an invisible sword and was about to push forward, felt that his body was shackled and his control of yen power was interrupted. Even Di Qing, who was in the void, was affected. His body trembled and he fell to the ground uncontrollably. The world was silent, and only the raging fire spread. The white magic barrier of the horsetail whisk faded away, revealing the figure of the netherworld old Taoist. At this time, he was in a sorry state. His gray-white skin had been burned with large holes, revealing his ghastly bones. One of his two eyeballs had also exploded, making him look even more ferocious. Bandit! How dare you insult me? He was so furious that his tattered Taoist robe and the horsetail whisk in his hand turned into ashes. Today, I'll definitely turn you into nourishment for my netherworld Dharma formation. The deafening voice stopped. The netherworld old Taoist held the sword in his right hand, and his left hand, which had turned into a ghastly white bone, kept making hand seals. Immediately, the immortal bone formation that trapped Jian Wushuang, Di Qing, and the others began to rotate slowly. Countless shattered immortal bones floated and surged within it, carrying an extremely ferocious killing intent and death aura. Even the immortal bones of the countless yen immortals who had died in this place had been refined and turned into nutrients for the formation. This was a fearsome array formation. As the netherworld old Taoist conjured a series of hand seals, the netherworld Dharma formation began to fluctuate like a swamp. The ground beneath their feet began to turn muddy. At the same time, pairs of white bone palms reached out and grabbed at Jian Wushuang and the others. Thick divine blood gushed out and instantly surged up. We are all nourishment to pay tribute to the souls of my dead subordinates. Netherworld old Taoist chanted in a low voice. With his voice, the divine blood in the netherworld Dharma formation completely devoured Jian Wushuang and the others and then began to boil. There were still immortal bones that walked out of the immortal graveyard. They rushed towards the formation without hesitation and integrated into it, becoming one with it and strengthening the formation. The boiling and viscous divine blood was like a heavenly river that fell from the sky, ferocious and ugly. Netherworld old Taoist looked at this scene with his only remaining eye. He seemed to be very satisfied. Then he moved forward. In the next moment, the river of blood in the netherworld Dharma formation trembled and a figure appeared. There was not a single blood stain on his body. He held an invisible sword high in his hand and drew the bow and arrow as if he was shooting the sun. The tension in his arm was at its maximum. The next moment, The invisible sword was suddenly thrown out like an arrow shot from a divine bow, with an indomitable force. Heaven and earth trembled, and the void shattered wherever the sword passed. The river of blood was cut into two. The invisible sword eventually pierced through the boundary of the netherworld Dharma formation and stabbed into the netherworld old Taoist's heart, which exploded with a loud bang. The unparalleled radiant light shone and brightened the dark north sky heavenly region for a moment. The explosion continued. The barrier of the netherworld Dharma formation was pierced through, and it was collapsing at an extremely fast speed. Standing on the blood river that was about to wither, Jian Wushuang slowly spat out a mouthful of turbid breath. A hidden red light flashed in his left hand. The river of blood was formed by the condensation of killing intent and death aura. It could easily contaminate the soul and cause the besiegers to lose their way. However, there was one thing that allowed Jian Wushuang and the others to easily avoid being devoured by the blood river. It was the palm-sized blood-red skull that Sha Qing, the master of the Sand Demon Cave, had given to Jian Wushuang before she died. The bloody skull's ability to absorb and sense blood qi was beyond his imagination. Even though it was sealed in the Boyang bottle, it still flew out uncontrollably, swallowing the endless killing intent and blood qi in the blood river. Jian Wushuang did not expect that the river of the netherworld Dharma formation, which was originally very difficult to deal with, would be destroyed so easily. After stuffing the skull back into the Boyang bottle, Jian Wushuang looked forward. Di Qing, who was standing in front of him, looked at him in surprise. He had destroyed the formation by himself and killed the netherworld old Taoist, who was a Grand Yen Immortal. How could he not be surprised? A small cultivation realm was already an impassable chasm, not to mention the gap between Yen Immortal and Grand Yen Immortal. However, it happened. Jian Wushuang killed a Grand Yen Immortal with the power of a Yen Immortal. It seems that my knowledge is still only the tip of the iceberg. Di Qing looked at him and sighed slightly. Jian Wushuang could not explain too much, so he just said, "It's just a coincidence." Shi Qingqi was still in a state of shock, and Zhao Ting looked at his back with a complicated expression. No one knew what she was thinking about. The thick smoke from the explosion slowly dissipated, and then a body that almost no longer had a human shape appeared. Under Jian Wushuang's attack, the entire left half of the netherworld old Taoist's immortal body was completely destroyed. In his shriveled chest, there was indeed a mass of immortal source that was about to be destroyed. However, at this point it had not been destroyed. He did not die. Although the immortal source was about to shatter, it still provided him with unimaginable power. The netherworld old Taoist was furious. With the last of his strength, he threw out the treasured true sword in his hand. The true sword that carried boundless dark blood qi slashed at him at a speed so fast that it was impossible to dodge. Heaven and earth changed color. Everything happened in an instant, and even Di Qing did not react in time. Jian Wushuang saw it the most clearly. When the true sword broke through the clouds, he almost subconsciously pushed Di Qing away. Swish! The treasured true sword, which carried boundless blood qi and killing intent, accidentally stabbed into Jian Wushuang's left chest and came out. Divine blood gushed out. "My lord!" Shi Qingqi cried out in alarm. Di Qing was also completely shocked, but he reacted in an instant and released the most terrifying force in front of netherworld old Taoist. A total of black, white, and red, 3 natal forms, all representing Di Qing's full force attack, crushed forward. Netherworld old Taoist, who had already shattered his immortal source, was finally exterminated by this blow. He was completely annihilated, and the entire north sky heavenly region was dead silent. Countless immortal bones that walked out of the immortal graveyard fell to the ground one after another without any guidance. The entire north sky heavenly region was dead silent. Jian Wushuang leaned back slowly as he was held by Shi Qingqi and Zhao Ting at the same time. Divine blood with faint golden patterns flowed from his back, and his pupils gradually enlarged. "It'll be fine, it'll be fine," Shi Qingqi murmured, and divine blood flowed out through the gaps between her fingers. Di Qing, who had already destroyed netherworld old Taoist, looked at Jian Wushuang with a serious expression and placed his palm on his broken chest. Strands of yen power with vigorous power tried to repair his chest. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes and said slowly, "Leave this place as soon as possible and rush to the realm of Great Me Heaven." After saying this, he passed out again. Di Qing nodded, took Jian Wushuang from the two women, and ran straight to the North Sky Heavenly region. Zhao Ting and Shi Qingqi also followed. After leaving the North Sky Heavenly region, which was full of immortal tombs, they finally entered the Great Me Heaven. The originally dark and gloomy sky disappeared and was replaced by a bright and vigorous heavenly region. That intense battle almost destroyed the entire North Sky Heavenly region. In the end, it still attracted nearly 100 top cultivators to investigate the North Sky Heavenly region. Di Qing's face turned serious as he passed by the guards of the Yen Immortals and top cultivators. Jian Wushuang was so seriously injured that he had to find a secluded cave to recuperate in order to avoid any permanent injuries. Then, Di Qing found a relatively thin and undetectable heavenly abode nearby and flew up. The clouds gradually thinned, and a total of 7 lotus-like celestial mountains came into view. Di Qing, who was carrying Jian Wushuang, directly chose the largest and most magnificent celestial mountain among the 7 lotus peaks and stepped on it. Boom! He waved his palm and opened up a small heavenly passage at the side of the lotus peak. They then turned around and entered. Di Qing, who was carrying Jian Wushuang, was the first to enter the heavenly abode, but he was soon stunned. Zhao Ting and Shi Qingqi also stopped on the spot. In front of them, in the depths of the small heavenly abode, a young man in a tattered long robe was sitting on the ground with his legs crossed in fear. He was looking at them in horror. Beside the young man, there were some high-grade treasures scattered around. It was obvious that they had just been scattered. Di Qing soon understood what was going on. It turned out that the Lotus Peak was not without an owner. It was obviously a blessed place for the young man to cultivate. However, even if this Lotus Peak had an owner, it had changed owners the moment he entered. Killing intent flashed in Di Qing's eyes. It was a piece of cake for him to crush a guy who was only in the Yen Immortal realm. Just as he was about to make a move, Jian Wushuang, who had passed out, opened his eyes slightly and said, "You can't kill him." Although Di Qing did not understand what he meant, he still restrained the killing intent in his heart. He looked at the down-and-out young man and said in a deep voice, "Get out in 3 breaths." When the ashen-faced young man heard this, he felt as if he had been pardoned. He did not care that this was his heavenly abode to begin with, and he hurriedly nodded. At the same time, he quickly picked up the high-grade treasures that had fallen to the ground and prepared to escape. The young man hurriedly stuffed the treasures into his arms and was about to rush out of the heavenly abode. But then, Shi Qingqi did open her arms and block his way. "You can't let him go, or else His Excellency's safety can't be guaranteed." When the young man heard this, he hurriedly closed his eyes. "Don't worry, I didn't see anything. I won't say a word." Di Qing also realized something. He immediately released the rope of yen power and tied him up, then threw him into the depths of the small heavenly abode. The young man, who had fallen heavily to the ground, was like a frightened rabbit. He started to speak incoherently in panic. "My lords, I, Weiliujia, am a good man. I have been working diligently on Daegu Mountain without slacking for a single day. I have not even missed out on the offerings I receive every year. The heavens can see my sincerity. I am loyal to the second prince." Too lazy to listen to his nonsense, Di Qing blocked his mouth again and whipped him several times with his yen force before he finally became obedient. The heavenly abode suddenly fell silent. Di Qing placed the unconscious Jian Wushuang on a flat ground and began to check his condition. Di Qing was surprised to see that Jian Wushuang's immortal body, which was originally fragmented and almost emptied of internal organs, had almost recovered. The shocking wounds were also healing at a rapid pace. Moreover, his aura had gradually calmed down from its previous fluctuations. It was only a matter of time before he completely recovered. "What kind of a freak is this guy?" Di Qing murmured in disbelief. Shi Qingqi also stepped forward at this moment, his eyes still slightly red. "The Lord's situation. He's fine." There's nothing serious with him for now, Di Qing said coldly. He was obviously more disgusted with this woman who was almost the culprit. Then can I take care of my lord? She said in a low voice. You can't, Di Qing replied coldly. He doesn't need to be taken care of. He will recover soon. Xianxia agreed and returned dejectedly. As time passed, the cave in the celestial mountain became silent. After an unknown amount of time, a faint and excited cry sounded from outside the heavenly passage. In the blink of an eye, a figure that was more than 3 meters tall suddenly rushed into the heavenly abode. Its extremely white fur was dotted with dense black patterns that were difficult to understand. It was the dream-eating tapir, and also the culprit who awakened all the immortal bones in the North Sky Heavenly Region's immortal graveyard. At this moment, it leaped into the heavenly abode. Its 4 pitch-black eyes immediately saw its master, and it was so excited that it wanted to pounce over. However, it was met with a powerful kick in response. Xianxia used almost all of her strength to kick it away. At the same time, before Zhao Ting could react, she pulled out the knife from her waist and was about to slash at the dream-eating tapir. In the end, the long saber with yen power flowing on it did not land. Instead, it hovered above the dream-eating tapir's head. Xianxia's eyes were bloodshot. It looked at it and said coldly, "Get out. From now on, I'm no longer your master." The dream-eating tapir sobbed softly and scratched the ground uneasily with its front paws. It did not understand why its master was so cold to it all of a sudden. It whimpered in a fawning manner, then crouched down and moved forward. However, this time what responded to it was a sharp long knife. The saber slashed down and tore a bloody wound on the dream-eating tapir's neck. "Get lost," Xianxia said coldly as she pointed the long saber in her hand towards the outside of the heavenly abode. The dream-eating tapir sobbed and lay on the ground without moving. At this time, a tired voice slowly rang out, "Forget it. What's in the past is in the past." It's reasonable for a small beast to not have developed its spiritual intelligence. Jian Wushuang sat up slowly and coughed lightly. "My lord, you're awake." Xianxia was surprised. The long saber in her hand dropped onto the ground, but she immediately became a little uneasy. "It'll be bad if I continue to sleep." He shook his head helplessly. Di Qing, who had been sitting beside him, looked at him carefully, then raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "You've recovered quite well." Jian Wushuang laughed. "Fortunately, my life source was not injured. My recovery is quite smooth." After he finished speaking, he slowly looked around. "Where are we now?" Di Qing replied, "The interior of Great Mi Heaven. We've already left the North Sky Heavenly Region. It seems like it's going smoothly. This little heavenly abode is not bad. Although the yen power is a little thin, it's still a good place to meditate." Jian Wushuang looked around and nodded. This heavenly abode hid wind and water, and although the decoration was a little cold, it was still considered elegant. The owner obviously had style. Just as he was about to look away, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a figure that was almost tied up like a dumpling in the corner of the wall. The dumpling was staring at them in horror. "This is..." Jian Wushuang was confused. Upon hearing this, Di Qing reached out and clenched his hand. The figure that was wrapped like a dumpling rolled over, and at the same time he removed the yen power chain from his mouth. Seeing this, the disheveled young man hurriedly closed his eyes and mumbled, "I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. Please, my lords, let me go." Jian Wushuang did not know whether to laugh or cry. "It's nothing. Open your eyes and let me see." The young man finally opened his eyes slowly. "You're the master of this heavenly abode?" he asked. The young man nodded and said with a trembling voice, "I am the second mountain lord of Daegu Mountain, Weiliujia." "Weiliujia? It's a good name." Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile and said, "How many mountain lords like you are there in the heavenly region of the Great Mi Heaven?" The disheveled young man named Wei Liujia spilled the beans. "There are dozens of heavenly regions in the entire Great Mi Heaven, but there are only 17 heavenly abodes like mine. There are only 17 mountain lords, and the mountain lords are hereditary and cannot be led by others. Jian Wushuang touched his chin. 17 heavenly abodes and 17 mountain lords. It seems that your status should be considered relatively high in the Great Mi Heaven, right? When Wei Liujia heard this, a hint of embarrassment flashed across his face. The position of the mountain lord of heavenly abode is indeed high, but my father died in battle when I was young. He only left me the position of the mountain lord of Daegu Mountain. Although I'm the heavenly mountain lord, I'm the only light rod in the entire Daegu heavenly abode. In addition, I have to go there every Hua year to offer offerings. My father never left any treasures behind, and I really can't get any treasures to offer. Therefore, after a few times, I became the existence at the bottom of the 17 heavenly abodes and was not liked by any cultivators. The entire cave of Daegu Mountain was filled with an awkward atmosphere. Jian Wushuang looked at the extremely simple heavenly abode again. Except for a few tattered futon that were almost patched up, all the other feng shui and scenery were pure natural. Only then did he confirm that he was not lying and that it was really poor. It can't be. You are a yen immortal and you are this poor? Jian Wushuang unconsciously added another blow. Wei Liujia was very hurt, and the expression on his face was almost embarrassed. Well, because I'm just a little yen immortal and don't have much ability to accumulate wealth, I can only live on this Daegu Mountain, which is why my life is so difficult. In addition, the prince has ordered that the mountain lords are not allowed to leave their respective areas of jurisdiction without permission, which is why they are so poor. I had previously asked for some precious spiritual treasure seeds from other yen immortals. I was prepared to plant some, and when the Hua year was coming, I would bring the harvest to the court as tribute. However, my Daegu Mountain is a land of evil. Nothing can grow here, only some ordinary things can grow here. Thus, after a few times, it became the situation you see now. At this point, Wei Liujia raised his head and looked at Jian Wushuang nervously. My lords, you can see that I'm really poor. Even if I strip off my clothes, I won't be able to squeeze out any treasure. Please show mercy. Jian Wushuang finally understood that the young yen immortal named Wei Liujia had inherited his father's position and received the title of Mountain Lord. However, due to his bad luck and various other reasons, he was so down and out that he could not even recruit talents. He could only stay in his own territory. Don't worry, we won't covet anything of yours. We'll only be borrowing this treasured land for a short rest before leaving. After Jian Wushuang finished speaking, he motioned Di Qing to release the rope on his body. When the rope was untied, the things that Wei Liujia had hidden in his arms were scattered all over the ground. Upon closer inspection, they were all treasures of various sizes. There were dozens of them, and they were shimmering with all sorts of treasure lights. They could barely be considered decent. The air froze, the corners of Wei Liujia's mouth twitched, and cold sweat seeped out of his temples. Jian Wushuang smiled and said, "Put it away quickly. We're just taking a short break here. We're not bandits who want to steal someone's treasure." "Yes, my lord," Wei Liujia responded and hurriedly stuffed the treasures back into his arms. While he was putting away the treasures, Jian Wushuang thought back to the previous conversation and quickly realized something. He asked, "You just said that you have to go to the court every year. You go to the court to see the second emperor, Prince Zhou?" Wei Liujia nodded. Jian Wushuang's warmth had unknowingly closed the distance between them. In addition, there were almost no top cultivators who came to visit Daegu Mountain on normal days, so he had no one to talk to. Thus, he unconsciously opened his mouth and said, "Yes, I have to go to the Heavenly Palace to offer an official tribute every 1 year." Jian Wushuang was moved by his words. After exchanging a glance with Di Qing, he asked again, "Then, has the offering ceremony for this Hua year begun or not?" "Not yet." Wei Liujia shook his head and said, "Every Hua year's tribute starts after the second prince returns from the Heavenly Court's feast. For some reason, the current year's tribute has been delayed for some time, but it will start in 3 years. Jian Wushuang's eyes brightened. This was simply great timing. Originally, he was still having a headache over how to get close to Prince Zhou. Now, this problem was immediately solved. As the saying goes, a lean camel is still bigger than a horse. Even if Wei Liujia was ostracized by the other mountain lords, he was still able to go straight to the heavenly palace and meet Prince Zhou. This was what Jian Wushuang urgently needed. If he went to the heavenly palace with him to get close to Prince Zhou, he would have a rather legitimate and undetectable identity. As long as Yinling was by Prince Zhou's side or nearby, he would definitely be able to find her whereabouts. At the thought of this, Jian Wushuang said, "If we want to go to the heavenly palace with you and meet Prince Zhou, can we?" Wei Liujia was stunned, but his expression quickly changed. "I'm afraid that's not a good idea. The heavenly palace is heavily guarded, and every person who goes to pay tribute will be thoroughly investigated. What if—" He did not say the second half of his sentence, but Jian Wushuang knew what he was thinking. If he took them to the heavenly palace, the consequences and problems that would arise would definitely not be something that a little Yen immortal like him could bear. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to persuade him again, Zhao Ting, who had been silent all this while, slowly walked forward. Wei Liujia subconsciously raised his head to look, and his entire body trembled at the sight. He hurriedly stood up straight and cupped his hands in salute to Zhao Ting. "Your humble servant, Wei Liujia, the mountain lord of Daegu Mountain, greets heavenly official Zhao. You recognize me?" Zhao Ting came in front of him and asked indifferently. "Oh, of course, you're the heavenly official serving the second prince. I'll definitely remember that," Wei Liujia said, embarrassed. Zhao Ting nodded and said, "I also know you, and you're the one who left the deepest impression. I can still remember you even now." His eyes brightened. "Thank you, heavenly official Zhao, for remembering my position. Of course I remember. You are the most unique individual among the 17 mountain lords," Zhao Ting said with a smile. "Ahaha, is that so?" Wei Liujia's expression turned awkward, and he naturally understood what Zhao Ting meant. This once-in-a-year court tribute had made him embarrassed every time, so of course he would leave a deep impression. If there were no accidents, he would make a fool of himself again in the heavenly palace. Zhao Ting naturally did not know what he was thinking. She continued, "They are all my colleagues. I have important matters to attend to, so I can't go to the heavenly palace. Can you take them to the heavenly palace to pay their respects?" Although Zhao Ting was asking, her tone did not allow any room for discussion. Although her words were full of loopholes, Wei Liujia did not dare to disobey. He cupped his hands and said, "Replying to heavenly official Zhao, the mountain lord of the Daegu Mountain, Wei Liujia, will obey your orders." Zhao Ting nodded and then looked at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang gave her an affirmative look and then walked toward Wei Liujia. "Brother Wei, did you prepare any gifts for the second prince?" When Wei Liujia heard this, he immediately broke out in cold sweat again. His expression was extremely uneasy. "Yes, I have prepared, but whether it will satisfy the second prince is another matter." "Then can I have a look?" Jian Wushuang smiled. All right. He had a complicated expression on his face as he slowly reached into his arms. A moment later, some of the treasures he had hidden in his arms were taken out one by one and carefully suspended in the air. When he saw the treasures that were prepared for the second prince, Jian Wushuang finally believed that Wei Liujia was really poor. There were as many as 4 cultivation techniques and Dao books that even ordinary top cultivators could find and look down on. They occupied 40% of the treasures. He had a total of 13 treasures in his collection, and each of them could only be said to be tragic. Other than the cultivation technique Dao book, there were also some treasures that he could not name. However, Wei Liujia introduced them to Jian Wushuang one by one. "This is the supreme jade tree glaze tile, the gold jade ring. Of the 13 treasures, only the supreme jade tree glaze tile had some value. It could nourish the meridians and had a good use for recovering yen power. However, even so, the effect of this supreme jade tree glaze tile was probably not as good as the crystal at the top of the Black Mountain." Wei Liujia wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. "These are all treasures I got in exchange for selling the true swords my father left me. I hope I won't make a fool of myself in this court session." Jian Wushuang did not know what to say anymore. These items could barely be considered treasures. If he were to bring these items to the heavenly palace or to the second prince, Prince Jiu, then Wei Liujia's ridicule and humiliation would be inevitable. With this in mind, he looked at Wei Liujia. With a flip of his palm, a small black wooden box appeared. He handed it over and said, "Fate has brought us together. Today, I'll give you a little toy." Although Wei Liujia was puzzled, he still reached out and took the small black wooden box. The next moment, he gently opened the box, and thousands of gentle white rays of light escaped from the box. They carried an extremely strong medicinal fragrance, illuminating the entire small heavenly passage for a moment. Gulp! A clear gulping sound reverberated in everyone's ears. Wei Liujia's eyes were wide open as he stared at the pill in the black wooden box. Jian Wushuang smiled as if he had expected his reaction. These pills were taken out from Emperor Lu Ya's heavenly court by the three of them. They were the emperor's collection and were considered a top-tier treasure. Even ordinary Grand Yen immortals might not even be able to take a look at them. Every single one of them was an existence that could steal the fate energy of heaven and earth. The emperor's treasury pills in front of him had a miraculous effect on stabilizing his foundation and comprehending immortal styles. Even Jian Wushuang liked this pill. In the end, Wei Liujia reluctantly retracted his gaze and closed the box. He shook his head and said, "The value of this pill is simply too valuable. I'm afraid that even if I sell my Daegu mountain, I won't be able to buy it. I can't accept it." Jian Wushuang smiled and said, "Take it. Don't you want to use this pill to gain some face when you go to the heavenly palace?" His words struck Wei Liujia's sore spot in the deepest part of his heart. It made him recall all the humiliation he had suffered since he became the mountain lord. In an instant, his outstretched hand clutched the box tightly again, his knuckles turning white. "Yes, I do. It's good that you want to. If there's an opportunity, you must seize it." Jian Wushuang patted him on the shoulder with a smile. "Then let's go to the heavenly palace together in 3 years. 3 years to Yen Immortal was just a blink of an eye. In the past 3 years, Jian Wushuang, Di Qing, and the others had not left the small heavenly abode on Daegu Mountain. They had all been recuperating and adjusting their strength to the peak. There was only one Yen Immortal who had not closed his eyes for a moment in the past 3 years, and that Yen Immortal was Wei Liujia. For 3 years, he had been caressing the box that Jian Wushuang had given him. He was extremely careful even when he opened it, for fear that it would be damaged. Looking at Wei Liujia, who was about to go crazy, Jian Wushuang could not stand it anymore and gave him 4 Emperor's treasury pills of the same grade but with different effects. Therefore, Wei Liujia was so excited that he almost passed out. The first thing he did after waking up was to bow his head. But he was stopped by Jian Wushuang. After a simple reminder, he finally suppressed his crazily fluctuating immortal source. 3 years had passed, and a unique loud sound of the morning bell and evening drum resounded from the corner of the sky. In the small cave on Daegu Mountain, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. "My lord, we should set off." Wei Liujia seemed to have been waiting for a long time, and he could not hold back the joy on his face. Jian Wushuang nodded, then stood up and walked forward. Di Qing followed behind him. The candidates who would go to the heavenly palace to meet Prince Jiu had been decided long ago. They were only Jian Wushuang, Di Qing, and Wei Liujia. As for Zhao Ting, Jian Wushuang decided not to let her go with him. Instead, he stayed with Shi Qingqi in the heavenly abode on Daegu Mountain. He had made this decision because, on one hand, the more people there were, the easier it would be for her to be exposed in Prince Jiu's heavenly palace. On the other hand, it was because Jian Wushuang did not trust her. To be able to become a heavenly official and be sent to assassinate Prince Mo, how could she be a simple Yen immortal? "My lord, can I go with you?" Shi Qingqi nervously rubbed the corner of his clothes and said uneasily. Jian Wushuang looked back at her and said, "Don't worry. I'll come back to pick you up and send you home after I'm done." At this point, the 3 figures left the heavenly abode and turned into 3 streams of flowing light that flew up. As his body shot up into the clouds, Jian Wushuang also noticed that at the same time, there were extremely strong auras rising from various heavenly regions and flying in the same direction. It was the center of the entire Great Mi Heaven. where Prince Zhou's heavenly palace was located. As the mountain lord of a celestial mountain which was different from the heavenly region, his status in the Great Mi Heaven was quite high. Every mountain lord was at least in the Yen Immortal stage, which was equivalent to Prince Zhou's last trump card. In other words, no matter how poor Wei Liujia was, he would still have some face in front of Prince Zhou. The 17 celestial mountains and 17 mountain lords were the closest to the heavenly palace, other than the lords of the blessed lands. There were 17 mountain lords and only 6 lords of the blessed lands. Their status was even more transcendent. Only Yen immortals who had made great contributions to Prince Zhou could obtain this title. It was also like the mountain lord position, it was hereditary. In less than half a day, Jian Wushuang and the others arrived at the heavenly palace in the center of the Great Mi Heaven. In the midst of the clouds and mist, a 10,000 feet tall heavenly gate stood among the clouds, towering and majestic. At that moment, hundreds of figures fell outside the heavenly palace like the sun and stars. Under the escort of their subordinates, dozens of noble figures strolled forward arrogantly. The moment Wei Liujia saw them, he subconsciously lowered his body, trying to avoid them. However, the more he hid, the more he was discovered. Among the 10 or so luxurious figures, the richest middle-aged Yen immortal recognized Wei Liujia with a glance. "Oh, so it's Brother Wei. It's been a year since we last met. It seems you've had some good fortune." That stout Yen immortal dragged his tone and strode over. Although he had the emperor's treasury pills that Jian Wushuang had given him as his foundation, Wei Liujia still felt that he was inferior, and his face turned slightly red. That stout Yen immortal was obviously one of the 17 mountain lords. His small eyes were constantly looking at the clothes on his body, and from there he said what he had just said. The clothes that Wei Liujia was wearing at the moment were also given to him by Jian Wushuang. The tunic was given to Jian Wushuang by the young emperor Prince Yen earlier on. Every single thread had taken the effort of countless embroiderers. It was a rare treasure, and he had given it to Wei Liujia. The stout Yen immortal could also see the extraordinary clothes on his body. His eyes rolled. Brother Wei, where's the true sword that you always carry around? Don't tell me you sold it to buy this outfit." As his voice fell, the remaining 10 or so luxurious figures roared with laughter, making the hall extremely lively. Wei Liujia's face flushed red, and he was about to rush forward to argue. However, Jian Wushuang, who was beside him, pulled him back and said in an undetectable voice, "Why would you want to argue with a barking dog? Kid, what did you say?" Jian Wushuang did not hide his voice, so the Yen immortal could hear him clearly. The Yen immortal's expression changed. Wei Liujia felt an inexplicable peace of mind, and his mentality had also changed without him realizing it. Facing the incoming stout Yen immortal, he fearlessly faced him. "Wei Liujia, get lost. I'm going to destroy that kid's life source," the stout Yen immortal said angrily. When Wei Liujia heard this, the corners of his lips slowly curled up. "Ding Chunshan, have I always been too kind? Allowing you to ride on my head and shit all the time? Don't forget that I'm also a mountain lord." The stout Yen immortal was stunned, looking at Wei Liujia in disbelief. The area outside the heavenly palace fell silent. "What a mountain lord!" Yen immortal sneered. "Are you going to make a great contribution to the entire Great Mi Heaven? I'm afraid you can't even afford the court tributes. Isn't it because of your father that you got your position? Why do you care how many contributions I've made? Even if I lie down and sleep every day, I'm still the mountain lord." Wei Liujia sneered as well. "How about we make a bet? I'll win the court tribute this time. How about you take off my shoes and massage my legs? As long as you can beat me, I'll even lick your shoes, let alone rub your legs," the stout Yen immortal said coldly. "If you're not as good as me, then you'll automatically remove yourself from the position of mountain lord and run 3 laps around the heavenly palace naked. What do you think?" "I'll agree to that." Wei Liujia gave him a sidelong glance before turning around and striding into the heavenly palace. Having suffered such a loss, Yen immortal, who knew that he had lost face, wanted to swallow him alive. "Wei Liujia, just you wait." In the vast scaling ladder, Wei Liujia's face was flushed with excitement. Damn it. I've never felt so good before. I've returned all the humiliation I've suffered in the past. I didn't know it was so satisfying. After he finished speaking, he looked at Jian Wushuang and said sincerely, "It's all thanks to you that I can hold my head high today. I thank you." Jian Wushuang smiled. "Actually, even without the foundation I gave you, you can still hold your head high. You've always been stuck in your own opinion. You don't know that to deal with that kind of person, you have to return the favor ruthlessly. Destroying him physically is far inferior to destroying him mentally and physically." After Jian Wushuang said this calmly, he did not speak again. Wei Liujia was also mulling over the meaning of his words, and for a moment he was even more in awe of him. There were 9,990 steps on the steps, and the magnificent gate of the heavenly palace only appeared when he stepped on the last step. The heavenly palace that Prince Zhou was in was grand and magnificent, filled with a sense of majesty. Compared to the palace in the northern heaven celestial prefecture of the late Prince Mo, it was less mysterious and ingenious and more majestic. This made Jian Wushuang feel that Prince Zhou was the real young emperor. After the heavenly court's grand banquet, the prince had set up the rules for the opening of the court, offering everyone Huayer. It was meant to firmly rope in the mountain lords of Great Mi Heaven and the lords of the blessed lands to prevent disloyalty. The door of the heavenly palace had been opened for a long time, and a fragrant scent drifted out of the palace, calming the mind of those who smelled it. A peak cultivator guard walked out of the hall and led them in. In order to show off their appearance and style, every mountain lord who came to the heavenly palace was followed by 5 or 6 top cultivation subordinates. Each of them was hugging a huge box, which was obviously a gift from the court. This was especially so for the stout Immortal who was confronting Wei Liujia outside the heavenly palace. He was followed by 8 top cultivation subordinates, and there were no less than 20 boxes in his arms. Wei Liujia, on the other hand, was very straightforward. He took his seat with a palm-sized supreme jade tree glazed tile in his hand. This scene was taken in by the stout Immortal, and he almost laughed out loud. He had read countless treasures and naturally could see that the supreme jade tree glazed tile in Wei Liujia's hand was not even as good as the clothes he was wearing. "I'd like to see how you're going to compete with me. Just wait for your butt to be naked and run 3 laps around the palace." The stout Immortal glared at him and sat down. Long before the mountain lords entered the hall, Jian Wushuang had already noticed that there were 6 elders sitting at the lower end of the throne. They were all peak Immortals with rather mature looks and should be the lords of the blessed land. Sitting beside Wei Liujia, Jian Wushuang's eyes were fixed on the empty throne. He was hoping that the figure with the heaven-patterned bone armor would appear in the next moment. "My lord, are you waiting for the second prince to appear?" Seeing the fluctuation in Jian Wushuang's eyes, Wei Liujia lowered his voice and said, "The second prince will only move from the immortal platform to the heavenly palace after the morning bell rings 3 times. Jian Wushuang nodded and waited with great concentration. When the sound of the bell, which seemed to have come from an ancient distance, reverberated, the entire heavenly palace fell silent in an instant. All the mountain lords sat upright and still. Even the lords of the blessed lands, who had closed their eyes to rest, opened their eyes. Outside the hall, there were the cries of immortal cranes, and at the same time, thousands of immortal clouds rose. Under the guidance of hundreds of cranes, a figure dressed in the son of the emperor's court uniform slowly walked into the heavenly palace with his hands behind his back. At this moment, the 17 mountain lords, the 6 lords of the blessed lands, many Immortals and top-level cultivators all cupped their hands and said, "Your humble servant greets the second prince." Jian Wushuang raised his head and looked at his back. Compared to the grand banquet in the heavenly court a few years ago, Prince Zhou had a more subtle calmness. It was as if he knew everything in his heart. He gave off a feeling that he was as calm as water. This was a very strong opponent, and you would never be able to guess his thoughts. Up until now, Jian Wushuang still did not think that what he had seen in the fight for the peach was Prince Zhou's true strength. There were hundreds of pairs of eyes watching from the heavenly realm's heavenly court of Jinwuyang. Judging from Prince Zhou's performance, that was definitely not the last of his strength. Even when he was suppressed by Jian Wushuang in the end, he definitely had several ways to escape. However, Jian Wushuang guessed that Prince Zhou might not be able to display his skills as to why he was defeated in the end. After all, from the immortal style he had used in that contest, it was very dark and fierce. Jian Wushuang had classified him as a dangerous person, so he naturally would not start a conflict with him. The scene of the Northern Heaven Celestial Prefecture killing Prince Mo would also never happen in the Great Mi Heaven. As he sat on the throne, Prince Zhu nodded his head slowly. He glanced at every Yen Immortal in the heavenly palace with a warm expression. Beside him was a white-robed Yen Immortal. "All of you, please take your seats." Prince Zhou waved his hand and smiled. "It's been a year since we've last met. Let's drink 300 cups of wine on this grand occasion. I am satisfied with the fine wine." With that, laughter rang out in the heavenly palace, and the atmosphere was extremely harmonious. In the face of these mountain lords of the celestial mountains and the lords of the blessed lands, Prince Zhou did not reveal his identity. Instead, he lowered his status to give others the feeling that he was on equal footing. Even Jian Wushuang could not find any flaws in the conversation, so he naturally did not feel uncomfortable. Immediately after, a servant boy began to present bottles of exquisite wine. Although it seemed to be a small bottle, it contained more than 1,000 tons of wine. Wei Liujia picked up the fine wine and poured a cup for Jian Wushuang, then Di Qing and finally for himself. This kind of unnoticeable small detail was naturally seen by the fat Yen Immortal, Ding Chunshan, who was sitting next to him. He was a little shocked. No matter how unbearable Wei Liujia was, he was still the mountain lord of a celestial mountain. His personality was like a stinky rock in a latrine pit. He was poor, but at the same time he was also so stubborn that did not listen to anything. And the two guys who could make him pour wine, weren't they his followers? Instead, they were reinforcements. When he thought of Wei Liujia's uncharacteristic behavior outside the heavenly palace, Ding Chunshan suddenly lost his confidence. Could it be that this guy is really hiding some treasure in his hands? Ding Chunshan was secretly nervous, but he quickly calmed down. Even if Wei Liujia had some treasures in his hands, did he not have any? Not only that, but the quantity and quality of the offerings far exceeded that of the previous ones. For the sake of this magnificent Huayer's court tribute, Ding Chunshan had brought almost all of his family's belongings with him. He just wanted to leave a good impression in front of Prince Zhou. The reason why he brought all of them here was because Ding Chunshan had a hidden meaning that he did not reveal. This was the first time that the Huayer court tribute ceremony had come late. There was no precedent. Moreover, he was well informed that he had vaguely learned that something had happened to Prince Zhou's fifth brother, which had led to a state of martial law in all the heavenly regions. Therefore, Ding Chunshan made a bold guess that the second prince, Prince Zhou, was very likely to send down the fate energy of the blessed land at this critical moment to strengthen the stability of the Great Mi Heaven. The 17 mountain lords of the celestial mountains and the 6 lords of the blessed lands were basically Prince Zhou's hired thugs and bodyguards. Only when the fate energy of the blessed lands descended again would they have a common benefit. Whether or not he could be promoted from the mountain lord of the celestial mountain to the lord of the blessed land would depend on this opportunity. Hence, Ding Chunshan had to take first place this time. He raised his head and finished the wine in the glass. Then he looked around with a smug look in his eyes. Jian Wushuang, who was sitting at the side, frowned slightly and did not take a sip of the wine in his cup. 3 rounds of wine had passed, but Yin Ling still had not appeared in the heavenly palace, which made him a little restless. He began to think about getting out and taking advantage of this opportunity to explore the surroundings of the heavenly palace. Just as he was thinking about how to escape, the atmosphere in the heavenly palace began to change subtly. All of the mountain lord's followers began to organize their boxes. Although the mountain lords were still drinking, they seemed to be secretly competing with each other. Prince Zhou loved the precious treasures born from the heaven and earth, and Prince Mo liked men. In the Great Sea region, almost all Yen immortals who had heard of him knew about this. This also led to the scene of treasures being presented now. Every mountain lord and even the lords of the blessed lands began to offer their own treasures. The first person to present the treasure was the lord of the blessed land who was sitting next to the prince. He stood up and took out a black and white Rui scepter from his arms. Your Highness, this item is called the Clear Avoidance Rui Scepter. It was forged by the divine craftsman Su Tuo in the Sansuan Mountain. It contains 2 extremely rich traces of innate fate energy and is a rare treasure. This object has a black and white bone bud. You only need to twist the black one to avoid evil spirits and clear your spirit platform. If you press the white one, you can absorb most of the evil thoughts and blood chi. The dual-colored Rui scepter that the older lords of the Blessed Lands first threw out was still valuable. If this item was used, it could avoid some Yen immortals who had special cultivation techniques. Prince Zhou, who was sitting at the head of the table, nodded his head in acknowledgement, not revealing any expression. After the lords of the Blessed Lands handed the Clear Avoidance Rui to the escort boy, he sat back down. Since then, the competition for treasures had begun. This was an invisible battle without smoke. An endless stream of rare treasures appeared, and they were of extremely high quality. Some of the treasures even tempted Jian Wushuang. As long as the immortal source was not destroyed, the dove myriad immortal grass could instantly form a peak immortal body. There was the heaven-defying multi-treasure gourd that could easily kill a Yen immortal with just a drop of blood. There was even a true sword made of heaven-hanging wood with a strong life aura. The heaven-hanging wood was an immortal wood that would only grow with the help of the Emperor's fate energy. It would wither and die once it left the Emperor's fate energy. It was an indispensable item in the construction of the heavenly court. A true sword made from heaven-hanging wood that contained a strong life force and showed no signs of withering and death was unprecedented. The value of this sword could no longer be measured by the value of a treasure. This true sword had completely become the most eye-catching existence. Even Prince Zhou, who had countless treasures, was extremely fond of this true sword. The person who had offered up the heaven-hanging wood true sword was the mountain lord of the 13th celestial mountain. He had only brought one treasure this time, but it had become an existence that could suppress everyone. According to him, he had found the true sword of the heaven-hanging wood in an ancient battlefield. It was very likely that it was forged by an emperor with supreme fate energy and given to his right-hand man. Ding Chunshan, who was sitting in his original position, could no longer remain calm. He could clearly sense that the treasures presented this time were incomparable to the ones presented in the past, be it in terms of quality or quantity. The quality of the treasure this time was simply too high. With the dove myriad immortal grass in front and the heaven-hanging wood true sword behind him, it was no longer easy to stand out. Ding Chunshan gritted his teeth and thought to himself, "I'll see how many treasures you have." In just half a day, dozens of treasures appeared like flowing water. When it was Ding Chuanshan's turn, he stood up arrogantly and took a few steps forward. With a flip of his palm, 2 black pearls that were slowly rotating appeared. Your Highness, this item is called the Sky-Setting Pearl. It is divided into the Thunder Pearl and the Cloud Pearl. The Thunder Pearl has the power to forge, while the Cloud Pearl has the power to destroy. One is to forge a small heavenly region, one is to destroy a small heaven region. As soon as Ding Chuanshan's Sky-Setting Pearl appeared, all the mountain lords started whispering to each other. To be able to seal 2 extreme powers in such a small bead was already amazing, and its power was also extraordinary. Prince Zhou, who was sitting at the head of the table, opened his mouth, which was a rare occasion. Not bad. When Ding Chunshan heard this, he was overjoyed and quickly cupped his hands. It's a blessing for me, Ding Chunshan, to have your highness like it. When the other mountain lords heard this, their lips twitched subtly. When it came to flattery, this guy was definitely an expert, and no one could beat him. After handing over the Sky-Setting Pearl to the guide boy, Ding Chunshan felt that he was in a good mood. Everyone was more pleasing to the eye. Next, it was Wei Liujia's turn to pay tribute, and the atmosphere in the entire heavenly palace suddenly became somewhat cheerful. There was a hint of a smile in Prince Zhou's eyes. He had a deep impression of the mountain lord of the Daegu Mountain, Wei Liujia. Every time he was offered an official tribute, he would wear a plain Taoist robe and looked extremely poor. Naturally, the treasures offered during the court session were like those sold at a roadside stall. They could not even be considered treasures. However, Prince Zhou did not care about these things. Thanks to his father's influence, Wei Liujia was still qualified to enter the heavenly palace and become the mountain lord of a celestial mountain. After all, his father was once from the Wei county, which was known as the god of war. Slowly exhaling a mouthful of turbid breath, Wei Liujia and Jian Wushuang looked at each other, and then walked forward with the supreme jade tree glazed tile. Your Highness, this is an item presented by Wei Liujia. It's called the Supreme Jade Tree Glazed Tile. It has the effect of nourishing meridians and recovering yen power. It's a treasure. As soon as he said that, the entire heavenly palace burst into laughter. Even the white-robed yen immortal behind the prince laughed in disdain. Ding Chunshan, who laughed the fiercest, said, "It seems that the second prince has suffered a loss this time. He hosted a banquet, but in the end, he received a piece of junk. It seems that it is time to raise the qualification to enter the heavenly palace." Jian Wushuang, who was sitting at the side, looked displeased. If they were not in the heavenly palace, he would have wrung Ding Chuanshan's head off based on the noise. Prince Zhou's expression was calm. He smiled and said, "All right, I've received your kind intentions. Go back to your seat." Wei Liujia agreed. After solemnly handing the supreme jade tree glazed tile to the guide boy, he took out a small, exquisite black wooden box the size of a palm. "Your Highness, Wei Liujia also has a pill to offer." The heavenly palace was silent. All the mountain lords were craning their necks, waiting to see what else he could make a fool of himself. Prince Zhou's interest was piqued. He stroked his chin and said, "Open it and take a look." Wei Liujia nodded, then reached out and gently opened the box. Immediately, thousands of seven-colored rays of light scattered out. The medicinal fragrance that was so thick that it was almost impossible to dissolve was like a painting scroll, instantly filling the entire heavenly palace. Prince Zhou, who had been moving casually, sat up straight in an instant. His eyes were fixed on the item in the box. All the mountain lords, including the lords of the blessed lands, stood up involuntarily. They wanted to see what exactly the pill was to be able to produce such a strange phenomenon. Ding Chuanshan's fat face was extremely nervous. He could smell something unusual. This pill, what's its use?" Prince Zhou asked in a deep voice. "Your Highness, it can allow a peak entry yen immortal cultivator to have an immortal root." The short words were like thunder that exploded in the heavenly palace. The effect was 10 times more powerful than the true sword made of the heaven-hanging wood. Even the usually calm and steady Prince Zhou could not help but take a deep breath. "Is this true? Your Highness is wise." As Wei Liujia spoke, he handed the black wooden box containing the pill to the guide boy. Prince Zhou hurriedly took it into his hand and looked at the dark golden pill in the box, which was shimmering with a rainbow shadow. After a while, he raised his head and said solemnly, "Liujia, what reward do you want?" The entire heavenly palace was in chaos again. This was something that had never happened before in the many years of worship. Prince Zhou had never mentioned the word reward. He had set a new precedent. Wei Liujia then slowly shook his head. "I don't want anything. Consider it as me paying back what I owed you for the past few centuries." Prince Zhou opened his mouth, but he had no reason to reward him. The appearance of this pill meant that it could directly cultivate a yen immortal. A yen immortal was the foundation of a strategic plan. It was equivalent to Wei Liujia giving him a yen immortal, so its importance was self-evident. Ding Chuanshan's chubby face turned pale. He suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and stood up to Wei Liujia's side. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness, I still have a treasure to offer." After he finished speaking, he flipped his hand and presented a copper bell. "Your Highness, this item is called the 9-rotation withered bell. Every rotation is a sound, and there are 9 rotations in total. Each rotation is stronger than the previous one. With just a slight shake, it can capture people's souls and seal their souls. Even yen immortals can't escape from it." After he finished speaking, all the mountain lords nodded their heads secretly. The 9-rotation withered bell was indeed a treasure of the highest quality, and it was indeed terrifying that it could consume yen immortals. However, compared to the pill that Wei Liujia had given him, it was still slightly inferior. Ding Chunshan looked at him with a cold smile. as if he was trying to vent his anger. His eyes seemed to be hinting that he still had many treasures that he had not taken out. How could he compete? However, Wei Liujia only gave him a sidelong glance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 small black wooden boxes. The atmosphere was so suffocating that even Prince Zhou could no longer remain calm. Your Highness, these 2 pills have the same effect as the one just now. They can help ordinary cultivators at the peak of the entry yen stage to grow immortal roots. The heavenly palace was in an uproar. All the mountain lords stood up and looked at Wei Liujia's hand in disbelief. The muscles on Ding Chuanshan's face trembled violently, and he subconsciously took half a step back. Prince Zhou clenched his fists tightly on the throne, and his eyes were gleaming. Following that, Wei Liujia looked at the dazed Ding Chunshan beside him and smiled faintly. Mountain Lord Ding, do you still have any treasures that you have yet to offer? I'm in a hurry, and I can't wait to offer up the rest of my collection. This guy was clearly showing off his wealth. All the mountain lords and the masters of the blessed lands looked at him in disbelief. This mountain lord of the Daegu Mountain, who had made a fool of himself in the treasure presentation for several Hua years, had actually defeated 16 mountain lords and 6 masters of the blessed lands by himself. 3 supreme-grade pills that could allow ordinary top cultivators to develop immortal roots had already exceeded the scope of rare-quality pills. Not to mention these mountain lords, even the Prince Zhou, had never seen such a mysterious pill. One of them was enough to crush them, but Wei Liujia had just given up 3 of them. Naturally, no mountain lord would be able to block or break his position. A total of 3 supreme-grade pills were sent into Prince Zhou's hands, establishing Wei Liujia's current unshakable position in one fell swoop. Wei Liujia laughed again. Mountain Lord Ding, are there any treasures you have yet to offer? Ding Chunshan, who already knew the situation, turned pale, but he still gritted his teeth and said, I still have. Before he could finish his sentence, Wei Liujia took out another box from his arms. I'll offer another pill. This has the same effect as the 3 previous pills. The heavenly palace was deathly silent, and Ding Chuanshan's face was ashen. For supreme-grade pills, that was like giving away for yen immortals. How the fuck could he play? Since when could even yen immortals be mass-produced? The yen immortal was the Tao of truth, not child's play. Having an immortal root meant that one had sensed the Tao of the future. If one were to rise above others, the subsequent effects would be unpredictable. The 4 supreme-grade pills had completely defeated Ding Chunshan, or rather, crushed him. The remaining 16 mountain lords and 6 lords of the blessed lands all took the initiative to accept the gifts from their imperial tributes so as not to embarrass themselves. Looking at this scene, Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. The 5 pills in Wei Liujia's hands had been selected by him. They were all average, but they could indeed help ordinary top cultivators to grow immortal roots. As for whether they could become yen immortals, it could only be said to be up to fate. For the first time, Ding Chunshan felt an unsurpassable fear. All the things he had prepared were completely useless. He had been completely defeated. Wei Liujia, who should have made a fool of himself, had been in the limelight because of his court tribute this Hua year. After taking a deep breath, Prince Zhou said slowly, Liujia, tell me what reward you want. I can give you anything within my ability. Wei Liujia laughed when he heard this. He laughed in an extremely carefree manner. Your Highness, I really do have something that I want. What is it? I want Ding Chunshan to take off my shoes and massage my feet. This rather jesting sentence stunned Prince Zhou and the group of mountain lords for a moment, but they soon understood the meaning behind it. Wei Liujia was returning an eye for an eye, returning the favor for the difficulties he had suffered in the past few years. Every time, it was Ding Chunshan who made him perform an impromptu sword dance, and the scene was quite embarrassing. And now it was time for a counterattack. Ding Chunshan was in disbelief. Then he looked at Prince Zhou for help. Prince Zhou coughed once and waved his hand. Wei Liujia agreed and then looked at Ding Chunshan with a faint smile. This was a complete humiliation. Once he did it, he would have to endure the ridicule of all the mountain lords. However, he had to do it. Since Prince Zhou had already acquiesced, he could not disobey. Ding Chuanshan's face was ashen. His lips were pursed as he squatted down. Just as his hands were about to reach for his boots, Wei Liujia took half a step back. After staring at him deeply, he returned to his original position. "Hurry up and go back," Prince Zhou said in a deep voice and chided Ding Chunshan. This time, he received 4 supreme-grade pills from the annual tribute. His mood was extremely good. Now that the forces of the princes had formed, it was quite difficult to recruit 4 Yen immortals out of thin air, even though the Great Sea region was vast. For Prince Zhou, these 4 pills improved his abilities by another level. With this in mind, he looked at the white-robed Yen immortal. The white-robed Yen immortal understood tacitly, but he immediately lowered his body and said, "Your Highness, isn't this too rash? It's not hasty. Announce it," Prince Zhou said indifferently. The white-robed Yen immortal acknowledged and took a few steps forward, facing all the Yen immortals in the palace. With the special permission of His Highness Wei Liujia, the Mountain Lord of the Daegu Mountain has made a great contribution. Wei Liujia is hereby promoted to a small heavenly official, and the Daegu Mountain under him will be promoted to a blessed land. He will enjoy all the blessings and luck of the Lord of the Blessed Land. This will take effect immediately. All the mountain lords and the lords of the blessed lands were shocked. Even Wei Liujia was so shocked that he almost fell from his seat. Daegu Mountain had somehow become a blessed land, and it was enjoying its good fortune, while he had been promoted to a small heavenly official. All of this was because of the 4 supreme-grade pills. Everything happened so quickly that Wei Liujia felt like he was in a dream. It was only when he knelt down to report that his mind gradually cleared up. It was true that he had become a small heavenly official, but it was also true that he had enjoyed the blessing of the Lord of the Blessed Land. He turned around and saw Jian Wushuang smiling at him. Wei Liujia had never felt so excited before. If not for the many Yen immortals watching, he would have gone to Jian Wushuang. After the appointment of ministers, the number of mountain lords had increased from 17 to 16, and the number of blessed landlords had increased from 6 to 7. At the end of the banquet, Jian Wushuang still did not see Yin Ling, which made him a little anxious. When the offering banquet was over, he did not want to stay any longer. He took Di Qing and prepared to explore the heavenly palace. "My lord, will we meet again?" Outside the heavenly palace, among the misty clouds, Wei Liujia asked with some reluctance. Jian Wushuang turned around and said, "If fate allows it, we will meet again. By the way, if you return to Daegu Mountain, take good care of the 2 ladies and don't let them wander around." Wei Liujia nodded his head vigorously and cupped his hands solemnly as he looked at his back. Everything seemed to have happened a lifetime ago, but he knew that a new age was coming. After walking out of the heavenly palace and bidding farewell to Jian Wushuang, Wei Liujia prepared to return to Daegu Mountain first to see the fate energy of the Blessed Land. However, just as he was about to leave the heavenly palace, several white-robed Yen immortals caught up to him. "Heavenly Official Wei, His Highness would like to invite you back for a chat." Wei Liujia's heart skipped a beat, but he did not show it on his face. After nodding, he returned to the heavenly palace. At this moment, there was only Wei Liujia in the hall where the fragrance of agarwood was rising. He and Prince Zhou sat face to face. Other than Prince Zhou, there was no other Yen immortal. "Liujia, how many Hua years has it been since your father passed away?" The prince asked with a smile after pouring him a cup of tea. "Your Highness, I can't remember clearly. I think it's been dozens of Hua years." Wei Liujia responded indifferently. He nodded his head. "It's been about that long. When I was young, I saw your father Wei Jun's heroic bearing in front of my imperial father in the heavenly court. He was very breathtaking and was worthy of being called the god of war." Wei Liujia cupped his hands. "I thank your Highness for your praise on behalf of my father." Prince Zhou chuckled. "I don't lack anything, but I do lack one thing, and that is the fighting spirit of the god of war, Wei Jun." Wei Liujia sat where he was, not quite understanding the meaning of his words. His father, Wei Jun, had died in battle dozens of years ago. Now that Prince Zhou was talking about it again, he was afraid that there was some other meaning in his words. After a moment's thought, Wei Liujia raised his head and looked at him. "Your Highness, What do you mean? Prince Zhou chuckled and patted his shoulder. It's nothing. Wei Jun, the god of war, is no longer here, but I need someone to replace him. I can't do without a capable heavenly official by my side. How about this? Go back and make some preparations. You can become a great heavenly official in the heavenly palace. Wei Liujia was taken aback and immediately shook his head. Your Highness, this is too hasty. I'm definitely not up to the task. For example, Zhao Ting, who was by Prince Zhou's side previously, was the great heavenly official. The so-called great heavenly official was almost the one who controlled the entire Great Mi heaven aside from Prince Zhou. He had great power. These words were like a series of thunder that exploded in his mind. Prince Zhou smiled again. Then, he took out a small black wooden box from his chest pocket and placed it on the desk between them. Liujia, these pills are very precious to me. I need them. Wei Liujia looked at him. He already understood the meaning of his words. Without the slightest hesitation, he took out the last box of pills from his bosom. Your Highness, this is my last box of pills. Different from the first 4 boxes, it can help Yen Immortal to understand the immortal style and deepen it. The short sentence made Prince Zhou's expression change a little. To help Yen Immortal understand and deepen his immortal style, this meant that he had completely opened up Yen Immortal's path to being a grand Yen Immortal. This effect could no longer be described as heaven-defying. Even the immortal peaches he obtained in the heavenly court could not compare. Restraining the sharp light in his eyes, Prince Zhou looked at him and asked, Liujia, where did you find these pills? Your Highness, it was left behind by my father. I found it by accident in the cave of the Daegu mountain, Wei Liujia said without the slightest hesitation. I'll present the remaining 5 to your Highness today. Prince Zhou reached out and took the last box of pills from him. He closed the lid gently and stood up with his back facing him. Liujia, don't lie to me. These pills can't have been left for you by Wei Jun. I've been by his side since I was young, and I know him the best. He's never kept anything to himself in his entire life. My imperial father doesn't like pills, so he naturally wouldn't have given them to Wei Jun. Only the emperor would have such a pill. At this point, Prince Zhou slowly bent down. Tell me, where did you get these pills from? Or who gave them to you? Wei Liujia did not expect this to happen, but he quickly calmed down. He cupped his hands and said, Your Highness, it was indeed left behind by my father. I've said it before. It's impossible. It's impossible for Wei Jun to have left behind such things. The prince raised his high pitch and said coldly, You must have found these pills somewhere, or someone gave them to you. His voice softened. Now, all you have to do is tell me everything, and the position of the great heavenly official will be yours. I will give you anything you want. After taking a deep breath, Wei Liujia said, Your Highness, everything I've said is true. There is no treasure land, and no one has given it to me. Prince Zhou's expression gradually turned cold. You're really not going to tell me? It's not that I don't want to tell you. I've already told you everything, Your Highness. Wei Liujia's voice was somewhat nervous. Do you know the consequences of not reporting what you have done? At this moment, Prince Zhou's expression had turned completely cold. As his voice fell, more than a dozen figures suddenly appeared in the originally empty heavenly palace. Every figure was enshrouded in dense yen power. They were all yen immortals. They walked over and slowly surrounded Wei Liujia. This is your last chance, Prince Zhou said indifferently with his back to him. His eyes revealed a look of disbelief, and finally returned to calmness from nervousness. There is no treasure land, and no one has given it to me. As Wei Liujia finished his sentence, a total of 12 yen immortals released their yen power chains at the same time, binding him. Send him to the heavenly prison. Prince Zhou turned around and looked at him. Wei Liujia's body trembled slightly. He asked in confusion and puzzlement, I've given you the best things without holding back. Why are you still treating me like this? Before he could get a reply, he was captured and sent to the heavenly prison. Liujia, don't blame me. My power has been weakened to the extreme. If I don't think of a way, I will always be in a passive situation. Within the clouds formed by yen power, there were immortal platforms. Jian Wushuang and Di Qing had already searched dozens of immortal platforms, but they still could not find any trace of Yinling. For a moment, even Jian Wushuang began to doubt whether Yinling was in the Great Mi Heaven. Just as he was about to search again, 10 figures shot through the clouds like streams of light, speeding into the distance. How did that kid get caught? Di Qing just glanced in that direction and said in a low voice. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. Wei Liujia? Shouldn't he have been sealed and returned to the Daegu heaven? Di Qing said, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Those yen immortals just placed their bets on him. Could it be because of those pills? His heart skipped a beat, and he quickly determined that Prince Zhou must have attacked Wei Liujia. However, he had never expected that Prince Zhou would fall out with him so quickly. Don't bother with those trivial matters. Rather than wasting too much energy, it's better to finish things quickly and return early, Di Qing advised. However, Jian Wushuang had already made up his mind. Wei Liujia was bound this time. If he did not rescue him, he would most likely die in the hands of Prince Zhou. Moreover, he had already roughly guessed that Prince Zhou had captured Wei Liujia because he suspected that the pill was not made by him but by someone else. For now, suspicion was just suspicion. If they could save him during this time, they would still have time to control him. This matter had started because of him, so there had to be a solution. With this in mind, Jian Wushuang turned to Di Qing and then flashed to follow that team of yen immortals. Di Qing had obviously guessed his intention, but he shook his head helplessly and followed him. Lightning snakes as thick as pythons were rolling in the inky black clouds, exuding a terrifying aura. At the same time, there was a heavenly prison that was extremely eerie. There were very few guards in charge of the heavenly prison in the Great Mi Heaven. There were only 3 top cultivators patrolling. After some time, a gust of wind blew into the heavenly prison, but it did not attract any attention. In the depths of the heavenly prison, it was extremely dark. A figure that was bound by yen power chains was suspended in one of the spaces. His originally thin immortal body was now covered in wounds, and divine blood dripped from every wound. His long hair was also disheveled, covering his face. The white-robed yen immortal, Prince Zhou's companion, was holding a long whip that emitted a dark luster. Every 10 breaths, he would lash out with the whip, cutting off a piece of flesh. Even an immortal body that had transcended the shackles of the great Tao could not resist it. Tell me, the reward remains the same, and you can even become a great heavenly official. What reason do you have to reject such a great blessing? The white-robed yen immortal warned as he waved his whip. Divine blood gushed out continuously, and the tortured figure slowly raised his head. Through the messy hair, a blood-red eye was revealed. The white-robed yen immortal's heart skipped a beat. After he calmed down, he began to whip even harder. There was a ripple in the air. Prince Zhou walked out slowly. You'll feel better if you tell me. I'm so stupid. Cold laugh sounded. I didn't keep a single one of the 5 pills. I gave them away without any thoughts. But now I've ended up like this. I've given you the best things without holding back. So why are you still treating me like this? Wei Liujia bellowed in rage. His pair of cold eyes stared straight at Prince Zhou. Impudent! The white-robed yen immortal roared as the whip in his palm lashed toward his face, leaving a long, bloody gash. The divine blood gushed out, but Wei Liujia did not make a sound. He only stared at him. Prince Zhou waved his hand to stop him. Just as he was about to speak, the entire heavenly prison suddenly trembled. Then, rays of extremely powerful yen power began to stir restlessly. Your Highness, there is a change in the heavenly prison. The white-robed yen immortal's expression changed drastically. As his voice fell, a violent explosion occurred. The entire space shook, and the invisible barrier seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure and burst. All kinds of extremely ferocious yen power filled the space. As all sorts of unknown and terrifying yen power filled the space, an ugly yen immortal with 3 heads appeared. It jumped around excitedly, as if it had been trapped for a long time. Right now, it only wanted to devour all living things in front of it. It roared excitedly, but the 3 pairs of eyes could only see a few figures before they exploded. Prince Zhou did not even spare it a glance. He reached out his hand and crushed its immortal source, crushing its immortal body. However, this was only the beginning. In the next moment, an arm that was more than 100 feet wide, like a giant python, suddenly tore the space apart and smashed over with an indescribable force. Some of the Yen immortals were slightly slower and were sent flying. Prince Zhou's expression turned cold as he started to fight with him on the spot. The heavenly prison was breaking apart. Countless Yen immortals who had been trapped here for an unknown amount of time were released and began to cause the greatest destruction. Damned thing! Prince Zhou was furious. A river of blood appeared on his outstretched palm, and he crushed the arm that was more than 30 meters wide. "All of you, follow me to investigate," he said, then disappeared with the group of Yen immortals. The heavenly prison was shaking more and more. Not long after the prince left, 2 figures wrapped in black robes appeared quietly. "Wei Liujia, come with us?" the leading black-robed figure said in a low voice as he extended his hand to destroy the Yen power chains around him. Wei Liujia, who had almost fainted, raised his head with great difficulty. When he saw the person in front of him clearly, he said in surprise, "Your Excellency, don't say anything. Leave this place with us," Jian Wushuang said in a low voice. An indescribable emotion welled up in his heart, and Wei Liujia nodded heavily. However, he soon realized that after enduring the punishment, his meridians had long lost all their energy. It was difficult for him to even perform the simplest movements, let alone run. "My lord, you should leave. I'm not worth saving," he said. Jian Wushuang saw through the reason and immediately released several rays of the Yen power to pull him out of the prison. It was Jian Wushuang who had caused the chaos in the heavenly prison. He and Di Qing had destroyed more than half of the prison and released the Yen immortals to cause chaos. The truth was just as he had expected. Prince Zhou had been sent away, and there was no danger. Looking at Wei Liujia, who was covered in blood, Jian Wushuang sighed softly. This guy had not revealed a single word about him to the prince at the last moment. His determination was evident. He was worth saving. However, just as Jian Wushuang was shuttling through the chaotic and broken heavenly prison, he suddenly felt a great sense of danger. The next moment, a great light that seemed to pierce through the chaos and dispel the extreme darkness shot over at an unimaginable speed. However, at this moment of danger, Wei Liujia, who was behind Jian Wushuang, suddenly stood up without any warning and directly faced the great light. However, he only managed to block it for a moment before the light went through his body and shot toward Jian Wushuang without losing momentum. However, the moment Wei Liujia blocked it, Jian Wushuang had a chance. He turned around instantly and pressed down with his finger. The extreme darkness heavenly gate, which he had not used for a long time, once again exploded with a huge amount of potential energy. The two collided, and the shock wave instantly cleared all chaos. Jian Wushuang used the extreme darkness heavenly gate to neutralize the light. He did not stop and pulled back Wei Liujia's broken immortal body. Soon after, Prince Zhou's figure appeared. His pair of heroic eyes shot out a brilliant light as he stared straight at Jian Wushuang. He had a feeling that this middle-aged man with an unkempt beard had a familiar aura. Jian Wushuang did not intend to get into a conflict with Prince Zhou. Therefore, he tried to escape after holding Wei Liujia. However, the tens of Yen immortals that appeared blocked their way. Di Qing frowned. He waved his palm, and an indescribable force smashed the 2 Yen immortals in front of him into meat patties. "Let's go," he said in a deep voice. Taking advantage of the gap, he reached out and directly killed 2 more. In Di Qing's hands, the Yen immortals could not even resist, and 6 of them were killed in an instant. Jian Wushuang nodded. Without any hesitation, he carried Wei Liujia and took the lead. On the other hand, Prince Zhou, who was hovering in the void, was completely shocked by the scene just now. To be able to kill Yen immortal with a wave of his hand, what kind of strength did he have to be able to do it so easily? Could this guy be a grand Yen immortal? A ghastly chill gushed from the bottom of Prince Zhou's heart. At the same time, His eyes revealed a hint of ruthlessness. Even if you're a grand yen immortal, don't even think about running amok in my great me heaven. When the entire heavenly prison was destroyed, Prince Zhou was still standing in the distance. He flipped his palm and a palm-sized white jade item appeared. The white jade object looked like a round mirror. It was completely white and densely covered with complex fine patterns. It looked extremely strange and ancient. With the appearance of this mirror-like object, the prisoners who were screaming in the heavenly prison all quieted down and ran away in a frenzy. Prince Zhou's expression was cold. He reached out his hand and touched the mirror without any expression. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the surrounding void dropped to the freezing point, and a cold and evil aura escaped from the mirror. Then, a strange laughter that sounded like Ling rang out, and then the originally ivory-white mirror suddenly reflected a red-eyed and red-haired baby's head. "Your Highness, long time no see." Prince Zhou cast a sidelong glance at the strange baby in the mirror in his hand, then threw the mirror into the air. The void stagnated like a swamp, trapping all the prisoners who wanted to escape, including Jian Wushuang and Di Qing, who felt a touch of uneasiness. A ray of red light that illuminated hundreds of millions of miles shone down from the mirror hanging high in the sky, making everything seem as if it was soaked in a sea of blood. It was unspeakably strange. Jian Wushuang, who was carrying Wei Liujia, frowned slightly. Then, he looked at Di Qing and said quickly, "Take him away from here. I'll be in charge of bringing up the rear. We'll meet at Daegu Mountain later." Di Qing looked at him again and pouted. "You should take him and leave first. I'm not at ease with you bringing up the rear." Jian Wushuang no longer declined. A 9 revolutions grand yen immortal covering the rear was more reliable than a yen immortal. Seeing him leave, Di Qing looked away and frowned slightly at the mirror that was emitting a demonic blood-red light. "You're just pretending to be a ghost," he said disdainfully and waved his hand to throw out a ray of yen power. The white light pierced through the blood space, but just as it was about to hit the mirror, it disappeared like a clay ox entering the sea. Then, a lotus-like tender white arm suddenly emerged from the mirror. Following the appearance of the arm, a red-eyed and red-haired head of a baby appeared. The baby had a mouth full of sharp teeth and let out a strange laugh. The mirror floating in the void was like a separate space, constantly revealing body parts. Di Qing, who was originally indifferent, frowned even more after seeing this scene. Not because of nervousness, but because of disgust. The red-haired child that came out of the mirror could no longer be described as strange. In front of him was a pocket-sized infant with a dark red apron around his waist. He looked normal. However, behind his head, there were hundreds of identical heads, hanging behind him like a bunch of grapes. From a distance, it looked like he had the body of a centipede. It was extremely disgusting. Even Di Qing, who had seen all kinds of things and experienced countless battles, could not help but raise his eyebrows. It was simply too disgusting. What kind of thing could look like this? They were pieced together, right? After releasing the extremely hideous infant, Prince Zhou immediately retracted the mirror in the air and fled into the distance. At this moment, Di Qing and the ugly child were the only 2 figures left in the ruins of the prison. Hee. Food. Powerful food. The countless heads behind the ugly child all stared at Di Qing at this moment, drooling without hiding it. "I advise you to get lost. Don't dirty my eyes," Di Qing said coldly. "Otherwise, I'll make sure you die." When the ugly child heard this, it was as if he had heard a joke. He grinned in unison. "Who do you think you are? Can you kill me? Even if you can kill me once, I still have 99 lives. What can you do to me?" Di Qing did not speak, but pointed a finger at him. An extremely fast yen power shot out like an arrow and instantly shattered the head of the infant who was still laughing. "With my absolute strength, even if you have 10,000 lives, I will still kill you without hesitation." He took a head from his back and placed it on his neck. The ugly child was completely furious. "Food! You deserve to die." With that, his lotus-like arms suddenly shook, and the blood space with infinite pressure descended again. Even the void was crushed. However, Di Qing just smiled disdainfully. He raised his palm and shook it directly. The blood space that was about to descend exploded from the middle, causing a rain of blood. The infant did not wait helplessly even though his attack had missed. He roared, and the hundreds of heads that looked like grapes and centipedes on his back opened their mouths at the same time, spitting out palm-sized blood-red bubbles. Di Qing obviously did not want to waste any more time. His eyes began to surge with golden light, and his palm had already condensed a full-power attack. When the tens of thousands of blood-red bubbles descended, he directly released a full-force attack. However, a strange scene appeared. Di Qing's unstoppable attack did not destroy the bubbles. Instead, the bubbles attached to it and began to devour it. Hee, it's really delicious. The ugly infant's body also expanded rapidly. At the same time, the heads behind him also changed their shape and formation, becoming a long snake, whistling and winding over. Because of Jian Wushuang's warning not to use any highly recognizable immortal styles in the Great Mi Heaven, Di Qing could not release his golden crow form and could only rely on yen power to resist. Right now, this ugly child was only at the peak of the yen immortal realm, but he gave Di Qing a feeling of extreme difficulty. Ordinary immortal styles had no effect on him and would be devoured. Even though Di Qing had crushed more than 10 of his heads, the ugly child was not affected at all. On the contrary, he seemed to be in a passive situation. Every head was devouring the yen power that was escaping from his body and constantly strengthening himself, which made Di Qing very unhappy. Just as he was about to disregard everything and directly release the crushing power of his image form, an extremely sharp sword intent that swept across 100 miles slashed over. A total of more than 20 heads were completely chopped off, making Di Qing feel that his body was lighter. Then, a mysterious figure covered in a loose black robe stepped in the air with an invisible sword in his hand. Di Qing raised his eyebrows and said, "Didn't you go to send that guy back to Daegu Mountain? Why are you back so soon?" The unshaven Jian Wushuang shrugged his shoulders. "I met an acquaintance on the way. After I threw him to the acquaintance, I quickly rushed over." Di Qing nodded. With Jian Wushuang's company, he felt a little safe. This big guy doesn't seem to be a single individual. It seems to have been forcibly glued together. He's very powerful. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and analyzed. "I don't care what he is. I'm done," Di Qing said in a deep voice. There was no fear in the eyes of the two figures as they faced the ugly child that almost covered half the void. Thick blood qi that was almost impossible to dissolve all spurted out from the hundreds of heads of the ugly child. Moreover, Jian Wushuang and Di Qing had been surrounded by hundreds of heads. In the center of this blood qi, he smelled a hint of unrest. After going through the sand demon cave, Jian Wushuang, who was burdened with karma and a major killing calamity, had reached an unprecedented level of understanding of blood qi and killing intent. He felt that the blood qi of this ugly child was very strange and complex. It was definitely not something that an individual could possess, but something that had been forcibly piled together. Jian Wushuang collected his thoughts and released 3,000 sword intents, which destroyed more than half of the blood qi. Di Qing moved as well. Without using his precious form, he reached out his hand and smashed dozens of approaching heads. With the two of them working together, they managed to kill over 100 of the infant's heads in the time for dozens of breaths, along with its body. However, before Jian Wushuang could stop, the residue in the broken blood space suddenly gathered together again and formed the ugly baby. He laughed excitedly. "I have 100 lives. How can you kill me? The more you struggle, the deeper you will sink into this blood qi. In the end, you will still become my nourishment." "Damn it!" Di Qing cursed in a low voice. Then he took a step forward and shook his arms. Thousands of golden feathers appeared, each of which shot down with great momentum. The blood space was pierced, and a shocking crack appeared. The ugly child's smile disappeared. Looking at the descending golden feather, he hurriedly controlled the grape-like head behind him to resist. But he had obviously underestimated Di Qing and overestimated himself. The golden feathers with a destructive aura burned blood void into nothingness and turned him into a sieve. Another life was destroyed. However, this was only a temporary solution. As expected, in just a moment, the ugly infant's figure appeared again and he roared angrily. After such a short confrontation, Jian Wushuang obviously did not intend to continue fighting. If it was really as he had said and they had to be killed nearly 100 times, it would be quite troublesome. The time that was left for Prince Zhou could allow him to do many things. By then, it would be very difficult for them to escape again. After all, to be able to send 5 peak Yen Immortals and 2 Grand Yen Immortals to the Northern Heaven Celestial Prefecture to assassinate the mastermind behind the scenes of Prince Mo, his foundation would definitely not stop here. After exchanging a glance with Di Qing, Jian Wushuang took the lead and left. Di Qing also waved his hands and condensed a golden light barrier to block the blood qi before flying away. The ugly child roared in anger, but he did not dare to move forward. He could only control the thick blood qi to erode the void. Just as Jian Wushuang felt that he had escaped from danger, the void suddenly turned red again. The bone mirror reappeared, and as the extremely dense red light descended, dozens of figures rushed out of the mirror. The white-boned old Taoist, who was dressed in a tattered Taoist robe, pointed his halberd finger and shouted angrily. A huge amount of yen power gushed out from the bag on his waist. There was also a 2-headed yen immortals who held 2 heavy hammers and threw them at Jian Wushuang. 10 strange and ugly yen immortals walked out of the mirror and blocked their way. Jian Wushuang's face turned cold. He raised his palm and clenched it in the air. Suddenly, the giant hammer stopped in the void and then shattered. "I'm afraid you can't leave now," he said in a deep voice, and a total of 11 figures surrounded him. These yen immortals that walked out of the bone mirror were far more powerful and cunning than ordinary yen immortals. They had all kinds of techniques and most likely mastered immortal styles. As he had fought with Prince Zhou in the heavenly court, Jian Wushuang had to hide his signature immortal style as much as possible. Although he had no idea where Prince Zhou was at the moment, Jian Wushuang could sense that he was hiding in the dark and could appear at any time. The 11 yen immortals, who were extremely ugly and gave off a strange yen power, charged at the two without stopping. Jian Wushuang did not hesitate any longer. The long sword in his hand exuded great momentum and endless sword intent. The Star River Lake Sea Sword intent bloomed. The butcher-like fat yen immortal at the front was the first to collide and was directly swallowed by the Star River Lake Sea Sword intent. The remaining white bones old Taoist, the lantern-carrying old woman, and the other yen immortals did not have time to dodge and were all sucked into it. As Jian Wushuang's strongest sword Dao and strongest sword intent, it was fully displayed at this moment. Even if these yen immortals were strange, they were still within the range of yen immortals. Jian Wushuang was invincible below the Grand Yen Immortal. This sword intent was as thick as the Sky River, which made Di Qing look at him from the side. This guy was only at the peak of the Yen Immortal realm, but he gave him an inexplicable threat. When the sword intent dissipated, the 11 strange and ugly Yen Immortals all disappeared. Not even a trace was left. Under the broken void, the body of an ugly child slowly condensed. Other than him, the other yen immortals were all dead. In just a short period of time, he had lost several lives and no longer dared to go forward. Obviously, Jian Wushuang did not want to engage in such a meaningless and murderous fight, so he left quickly with Di Qing. The void shattered and the heavenly prison collapsed. Everything was shrouded in the blood qi and everything was distorted. The void rippled, and Prince Zhou walked out of it. The bone mirror that was hanging in the sky fell back into his hand. Seeing this, the ugly child subconsciously took a few steps back and looked at him in horror. "My lord?" "Useless trash," Prince Zhou said indifferently with his hands behind his back. "Have you arranged everything?" "My lord." The blood qi must have already blinded their eyes and thrown them into confusion. The ugly child grinned. Prince Zhou cast a glance at him. "Well done. When this matter is over, you can choose a few more immortal bones to nourish yourself. Thank you for your grace, my lord." He grinned, and the desire in his eyes could not be concealed. Jian Wushuang and Di Qing both heaved a sigh of relief after escaping from the blood-red prison. No yen immortal followed them. The gloomy sense of oppression disappeared soon after. Moreover, Prince Zhou did not follow them. "Let's leave this place first. We'll make plans later." Jian Wushuang made his decision. Since Prince Zhou had already discovered their existence, the entire Great Mi Heaven would definitely be in a state of martial law for a period of time. It would be even more difficult to find Yin Ling, who was wearing the heaven-patterned bone armor. He did not know if it was an illusion or the discomfort after the battle, but Jian Wushuang felt that the heavenly region in front of him was covered with a layer of faint red muslin, and even his vision was slightly distorted. This was not a good sign. He did not stay any longer and left the heavenly prison dimension with Di Qing, away from the heavenly palace. He went to Daegu Mountain to rest. However, what he saw in the next moment shocked him. All the heavenly regions were shattered, the mountains collapsed, and the heavenly river that was like a silver ribbon in the clouds was cut off. The sky was extremely dark, and endless flames fell, burning everything in sight. There was no intact heavenly region in sight. More than 20 heavenly regions, 17 celestial mountains, and 6 blessed lands formed the vast Great Mi Heaven, but it was now being destroyed. After a while, Jian Wushuang came back to his senses. He still could not believe the scene of destruction. He murmured softly, "Who has such energy to cause such a degree of destruction to Great Mi Heaven in such a short time?" Di Qing, on the other hand, revealed a meaningful expression. "It seems that none of the disciples of Zhen Wuyang are ordinary people." Jian Wushuang began to feel uneasy when the Great Mi Heaven suddenly suffered such a degree of destruction. Yin Ling would definitely leave Great Mi Heaven, and it would be almost impossible to find her again. With this in mind, Jian Wushuang hurriedly flew in the direction of Daegu Mountain. With the support of the mountains and rivers in a single thought, he returned to Daegu Mountain in a few breaths. But at this moment, Daegu Mountain had already been destroyed. The entire mountain had been cut in half and countless lotus flowers had been destroyed by the fire. Furthermore, a thick, ink-like black gas was spurting out from the small heavenly abode. Jian Wushuang knew that something was wrong, and he came to the broken heavenly abode in a flash. Within the black mist of the hollow, there was a huge man in golden armor. He was several feet tall, and even Cheng Qing looked small in front of him. Black smoke surged around this giant man, revealing his strength at the peak of the Yen Immortal stage. He sat in the depths of the heavenly abode like a small mountain. Furthermore, the entire heavenly abode was filled with crunching sounds, which was extremely strange. Perhaps sensing something strange, the giant man slowly turned his head, and a huge wild boar head came into Jian Wushuang's eyes. The huge man had the head of a wild boar, and there were 2 ferocious-looking long teeth in his mouth. The long teeth on the left had a delicate thigh hanging from it, and the long teeth on the right had pierced through a head with wide eyes. And all around him were broken remains of a corpse. Wei Liujia's head was already gone, and his head was skewered on his long teeth. Moreover, more than half of Zhao Ting's head had already been eaten. None of them survived. Looking at the ghastly remains of the dead bodies on the ground, Jian Wushuang was furious. He directly condensed an invisible longsword and slashed at the giant man. The huge man sitting cross-legged on the ground was not afraid at all. He was even a little surprised. "Ninth brother, you're back so soon." A strange scene happened. Jian Wushuang's sword intent passed him and cut into the wall, completely shattering the heavenly abode. Throwing away the half-eaten Zhao Ting's head, the huge man quickly stood up and walked toward Jian Wushuang. "Ninth brother, why have you returned so quickly? Have you completed the task Big Brother gave you?" Jian Wushuang took a few steps back and pointed his sword at him. He asked in a deep voice, "Who are you? Why did you kill them?" "Ninth brother, you must be muddled from the fever. I'm your third brother." The huge man with the wild boar's head scratched his head and said, "Kill them? They're just a bunch of little Yen immortals. Our goal is far more than that. Big Brother and the others have already attacked the city. I think it won't be long before this place will be ours." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang frowned. He was not sure for a moment. Was there something wrong with this guy's brain? Why did he call a stranger ninth brother? "You know me?" he probed. You're my ninth brother, of course I know you, the huge man said. Have you completed the mission Big Brother gave you? At this point, Jian Wushuang was still a little confused, but he continued to say calmly, I've done what I should. That's good. Let's go and meet up with Big Brother and the others now. With that, the giant man stuffed the thigh on the pig's tooth and Wei Liujia's head into his mouth. He chewed as he walked out. Jian Wushuang turned his head and saw Di Qing, who had been beside him, had long disappeared. He was the only one left. Looking at the wreckage of the heavenly abode, he sighed softly and then waved his hand to bury everything. Stepping into the broken sky, the destruction continued. The heavenly fire with a destructive aura burned all living things. Everything seemed so unreal and bizarre. The living beings in every heavenly region were wailing in pain before they were annihilated. Clouds of black qi covered everything. The huge man in charge of guiding them chewed with big mouthfuls as he mumbled, Ninth brother, what are we here for? Isn't it to create a world that belongs to us? Look at this, it's all going to be ours. Jian Wushuang's expression did not change. He began to feel that something was wrong. All the yen power around him fluctuated and showed a unique gray-white color. Everything before his eyes seemed to be some sort of illusion, or perhaps a dream. Ninth brother, why are you in a daze? We're going to build a world of our own here, and with this as a foundation, we'll continue expanding. The giant man spoke with fervor and assurance. Jian Wushuang suddenly felt a little dizzy. The surrounding scenes were jumping and changing from gray-white to rainbow-colored light at an extremely fast speed. Everything was constantly enlarging and jumping. My lord, why are you here? You've really made Liujia search for you. All of a sudden, Wei Liujia's head, which had been chewed up, emerged from the giant man's mouth and looked at Jian Wushuang with a strange smile. Immediately after, the heads of Shi Qingqi and Zhao Ting popped out at the same time and shouted at him, Sir, help! Sir, help! Jian Wushuang's head ached even more, and he could not even think about it in the simplest way. The huge man reached out his palm and pressed the heads back into his mouth. He asked with concern, Ninth brother, are you all right? I could tell that something was wrong with you when you came back just now. Everything was so bizarre and absurd. Don't come near me, Jian Wushuang said in a low voice. He was enduring the increasingly explosive pain in his head. But then, the bizarre scene suddenly changed again.